is where you do the health and safety, but there is no health and safety other than don't let your computer explode.
If anyone has a fire, the advice is don't continue with the conference or the talk. Get out. Just leave.
So
right.
I think we should just go for it. Is that okay with you, Gary?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. To be fair, I've got an easy night tonight. I've now kicked everything off. I'm done. I can just contribute to the event. So I'm not presenting. I'm not doing anything tonight. So it's good.
Great. Well, sit back and enjoy.
I have wine. I'm good.
So I think the order is slightly different from the one that you've got there.
Fair enough.
20. Yeah, it's slightly different from the order that you've got there, which came out in the email today, is the right order, and the one on the website is the right order. So if anyone wants to check it out, it's on the fmbug.org website. It's got the current correct agenda, which of course may change again during the event. We're going to kick off with Ian doing effectively part 3 of his Core ML stuff, but some real world stuff going on, and then Doug's going to talk about FileMaker server enhancements, and then Robert's got about a 50-minute presentation on making code more readable, which is something we should all be doing, definitely. And finally, we've got Dimitris, who's going to join us and lead a discussion on the opportunities and setup of add-ons on the production line. So hopefully that will all go swimmingly and we'll be on time with all of those events, but we'll see. So at this point, I think I'll just shut up and hand over to Ian and let you just dive in there, Ian.
Okay, I can be really quick if everyone wants. So, okay, I'll just click.
No, we don't need you to be quick. We need you to be interesting, which you will be.
Share. Okay, just a second.
That's looking good.
Cool.
Anyone think you've done this before?
Right. I'll sort of start off by the previous couple of presentations I did. We're looking at the Core ML features in the first one was looking at the Core ML features in FileMaker 19, which are really cool. Then the second one was looking at how to build some Core ML models. And then Jewel asked if I could show something, application of something. So as is so often the way, actually this has nothing to do with Core ML, but where it does tie into the prior talks in that it shows some of the pre-processing that needs to go on with images before you're able to do apply the ML models to them. So at the moment, the model that I'm using is basically, it's one that I did in TensorFlow, and it's running on a Python web service. But it integrates with FileMaker, and anyway, I'll get started. So I was just kind of playing around, and I sort of got the idea. I wondered whether it would be possible to take a photograph of a Kanban board and then have that update sort of a digital Kanban board. And so the way I started off was that I used one of FileMaker's, it's the tasks from one of FileMaker's standard things. And then what I did was to that I added the Kanban plugin. So if I just go create a new layout, if anyone's not familiar with this, I'll just say finish. And then I added the add-on, Kanban add-on to that. And then if I just, actually, I'm not going to save that, but because I don't want to, I've not done this this part before, so I don't want to break my demo right now, right at the beginning. Anyway, the add-on functionality is just amazing. It made it so easy to add the Kanban functionality. And if I just revert my layout there, discard, and then I'll just go. So this is kind of how it, well, actually there's no data at the moment, but basically with the configurator, we choose what's the data source, what's the primary key, what's the name, set up the lanes for the value list, and so forth. So anyway, I'll just close that. So, because that's fairly standard. So I then added a layout that basically just has a container. And so I made up my fake little Kanban board. I'm not sure if you can actually see my picture, but essentially, well, you can see the photograph of it. So the idea was that I could take a photograph with FileMaker Go on my iPad or iPhone, and I could then process what we've got here to send it to the Kanban board. So if I start off with this photo, so the lanes I've got here correspond to the lanes in the FileMaker Kanban board. And if I say process, it then has now updated my FileMaker Kanban board with, I shouldn't have clicked on it. In any, this always happens in demos. In any event, what this is, basically we're updating the data in the Kanban sample data table. So it's created the two records there that correspond to my items in the board under the to-do column. And you'll notice that actually it didn't come through perfectly, that basically we've got a space in plan and the architecture is misspelled. So this really is a very early stage demo that you're seeing. So to be honest, I did enough work on the TensorFlow model to get the handwriting recognition basically working, but it needs a lot more work to actually make it something really usable. So that part works. It can add items. I'll just do a really quick demo, then I'll go through some of the background stuff, how it works on the back end. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. So processing it again has not done anything to it. If I go to the next record, I've shifted things around a little bit, and I've added in an architecture item. So if I process that, goes off. It's updated the plan, though, well, actually what it's done is it's created another plan, because the problem in this case is that the images are slightly different size, so got recognized differently. Likewise, architecture with my appalling handwriting got recognized twice. So what it will do, and if I process that third photo where it's moved on a bit more, so it's updated plan and the architecture. So the my handwriting and the handwriting model needs a lot of work on both parts. So that's kind of what it does now. The script that we're running in FileMaker is essentially, I'm just calling my web service to update. So my web service is just running on, it's running in just off a server I've got running here. And then the script parameter is the image ID. It basically, it does the insert from URL, then creates a new window that just shows you the Kanban board. So that side of it's pretty straightforward. And if I go to Chrome, right, sorry. Basically, it's configured somewhat like this. FileMaker Pro or Go sort of adds the photo to FileMaker server, and then would call my Kanban handler running on my web service, which is in turn calling the image, another image to text service. And then that basically talks back to FileMaker server through the data API. So both of the web services are written in Python and running in Flask as the web server. So the processes look a bit like this: that we take a photo, pretty standard. FileMaker client updates FileMaker server. That when I process the photo from FileMaker client, does the insert from URL, talks to my handler, which in turn, the parameter is the image ID from FileMaker. So that requests the image from FileMaker server, which returns the image, and then we process the image. Then, when processing the image, we send various regions of the image to the image to text service, which returns a text. The Kanban handler then tries to find the task in FileMaker server. It returns a task with the ID of the task if it is there. At that point, it then adds a new task or updates the existing task. And then was trying to trigger a refresh. And I kind of cheated a little bit. So I was triggering a refresh on the UI by, because the data API can't directly update or refresh the screen. So what I was doing was I was just I was deleting the record on this layout and then adding it back to kind of trigger a refresh in FileMaker. But that was the original way I did it. Since then, I've just swapped over to just simply doing popping up the card window in FileMaker as a means of displaying it. And then we return a result back to FileMaker. So in terms of what we're doing in the processing, so the processing section actually takes the one image, and then it needs to segment that image. It needs to find we need to work out what are the labels on the columns. We also need to find out where the columns are. What are the dimensions of the columns? Sort of how do we know which of the cards fits into which column and which lane on the board. So we then basically, once we've got that, we need to separate out the individual cards from the overall photograph. So once it's separated those out, then it basically loops through these processes and does the update on the FileMaker server based on which lane they're in, i.e. the lane corresponding to the status. So there's quite a number of things that basically need to be done. One of the things that I had done was the orientation of the photographs is extremely important for determining which lane things go into. So I was originally doing that, determining that off the EXIF data. So I'd read the EXIF data from the image, and then I'd rotate the image so it was in the correct orientation. But what I then discovered is that if you take a photo on an iPhone or iPad and then basically upload it to your computer, it basically seems to strip all the EXIF data out of it. So then I had a second approach, which was looking at the dimensions of the photo when rotating to what I expected. The problem with that, though, is that in some cases, I'd end up with a photograph that was upside down, which wouldn't work. So the orientation of the images needs more work. To be honest, that could be done probably relatively easily by detecting the column headings and where they are and then working out the orientation from that. So that's kind of something that needs doing. The other thing is that you'll see here that the scale of the photos is different, and that has an effect as well. So what I'm needing, one of the next things to do is to rescale, so I've got a consistent size. Not only that, but they're not actually square, so they need to be transformed to get them so they're square. And then in this case, part of the issue with the architect, where it says architecture, is not only my handwriting, but also the slope that I've got it sitting at, that it's not necessarily detecting it as a single word. So it's breaking it up more as a result of that. So there's a lot of pre-processing that needs to go on with this stuff before I can hand off to the web service to do the image to text. Now, I've chosen to do that myself, and I've trained the model. To be honest, that could just as easily be handed off to something running on Google or Amazon. However, my feeling was that training the model, it took about 3 hours running on my my Mac Mini to train the model in TensorFlow. But the next step I want to do there is that I bought a Coral TPU external unit that I'm going to hopefully should speed up the training of the models. The other approach would be that I could actually potentially just train it. I could do the training on Google's infrastructure. That would be a lot quicker, obviously, than training it on my Mac Mini. Or I could just do it overnight, I suppose. So there's a lot of work still remaining on the various pieces of this. So so some of the thoughts, the columns, like which lane is it in, the location, the dimensions of that, determining the labels of those, the cards. I need to find the location. I need to work on the scaling, determining the status, what's the label. And then the image, the rotation parts need to be done. So this here shows sort of an example of identifying the column headings, basically where they've been segmented out into their separate regions for determining that. And then this is a photo showing how things would look actually in the processing when it's actually separated out the cards and identified them and got them separate. So, and then one of the cards with the text that I've written, and then the detected text written onto it. So, yeah, that's, like I say, it's very much a proof of concept kind of stage at the moment. But I found it really, really interesting and quite educational doing this. So there's a number of different moving parts going on. So sorry, that's a fairly short demo. But so does anyone have any questions or areas that?
One question I wanted to ask you, and it's using the sticky notes is actually quite a good way of determining the edge of the box that you need to analyze. So you've got to contrast the color. Does that help? Or does it not make a difference?
There's a couple of different ways of going about it. What I'm doing at the moment is that basically currently it just works with yellow sticky notes. So what I'm doing is I'm basically using the color as a means of breaking it out. So if you bear with me 1 second. I've already got that here, but so this is the board, and then in this case you can see here that's how it's splitting them out. So I'm using the color, basically keying off that as a means of identifying the edges. There's a bunch of other edge detection techniques I could use. The issue with those is that in the case of those backgrounds, that they're one of the really big problems I've had is shadows. That shadows get detected as edges. And so that's one of the areas that there are workarounds for that. I can apply some filtering to the image pre-processing, but I've not yet added that in. So it feels like every step I take, I sort of come up against another thing that to make it work better or properly, there's more stuff that needs to be added in. So it's been an ever-growing thing since I first did it and got it running. But shadows is one of the big is a big issue. So
okay, I was just going to say the contrast of color makes it potentially the software easier to then distinguish which is an element in its own right. If that was just a standard whiteboard that was written on, you're not going to know where the end of the bit of the text is for the next element. So it gives you an idea, unless someone does a vertical, horizontal line sort of thing to say that's a break point between these categories. There's
another approach I could take there, and frankly, that would just be essentially detecting the words as regions that I'm interested in, and then basically determining whether there are actually words that make sense, and then using those. Now, that wouldn't work if somebody had gone multiple lines of something. How to determine where does sort of a contiguous chunk of text end or not would be certainly more tricky in that case, but doable. But anyway, it's so it's like I say, it's kind of very much proof of concept stage at the moment, and I've got to confess actually that while what I've shown you is not perfect and sort of the recognition of the text very rough at this stage, but I've gotten much further than I expected, much faster than I expected, I've got to say. So anyway, I found it extremely interesting so far. So
yeah, it's great, Ian. You're going to be the go-to man for this sort of thing in no time.
Well,
yeah, it's fascinating. You actually bring what you've been talking about to more of a real world situation, you've leapt in with one where you've got to cope with the vagaries of human entry and handwriting and things. So you've picked it up, I reckon.
Yeah, I chose FileMaker first because I've got a FileMaker server basically sitting behind me that I can talk to, and I'm pretty familiar with that side of things. But the really funny thing is that actually I had one of my friends come back to me and say, if you can get that talking to the Jira API, we'd be really interested. So I mean, with things like Jira or Trello's got a pretty straightforward API, so getting it talking to that would be really easy. Jira is, that's like a chunk more. I mean, it's from Atlassian, so it's needlessly complicated. That's just the way they are. In any event,
and Trello's been acquired by them.
Yeah, they were. The day they were acquired, I remember tweeting to them, "It's like, please don't ruin it," which seemed to be the consensus of most Trello users, that they were worried that Atlassian was going to make it really complicated. But anyway, so are there any other questions that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. When you're training these models, do you find you have to do, when you're adding new features, so say for example the shadow detection that you're working on to add to the model, do you find you have to go and do a lot of regression testing to to make sure that something that you've done in now doesn't pull the rug out of something previously?
I'll be quite honest with you. The detection of the objects isn't using machine learning model at all.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it's basically what I'm doing is I'm doing basically the sort of masking the image with the color range, and then it's kind of doing some straightforward old edge detection to do it. So it's not I've not built sort of a TensorFlow model to do that part. Could do, and that's probably that probably would actually be more effective at that side of things. But at the moment, the TensorFlow model is really only for the handwriting recognition.
Cool.
Ian, your machine learning templates, are you doing them from scratch, or do you find somewhere where we can pick some up that might be useful for other projects?
In that case, the basically for TensorFlow, with this one, it was essentially it basically was a I think it was a Google tutorial on handwriting recognition with TensorFlow, and I think I basically started with that and then adapted it. So what they got was they got sort of a very large sample, a lot of photographs of individual handwritten letters, and I'm not sure how many tens of thousands, but quite a lot. And then basically I sort of wrote the Python code to build a TensorFlow model from that. And clearly my handwriting is considerably worse than anybody they had in their sample. So, but one of the interesting things there is that what I found was that because the model is detecting individual letters, that the spacing between letters and detecting the individual letters as individual objects to get passed and recognized, that I found that if I wasn't totally consistent, I was getting spaces in the middle of words, or in one of the examples that I got, a couple of bits of just sort of little marks on the paper were getting interpreted as quote marks, things like that. So there's quite a lot of pre-processing required to get things working really, really well. And yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that if you're doing the image processing, maybe you'd be better working if you're actually looking for handwriting. It's maybe just working on the image first and getting it into a different format. Maybe just stripping out all the color to make it easier for the handwriting recognition aspect.
Yeah, I think actually yeah. So and this basically in this example.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it basically once I've detected the image, then basically it all goes grayscale. But it's amazing how much noise there is in the background of just about every image that you work with. There's once you start doing some processing and look at and trying to work out why something's having issues, it's really very, very interesting seeing just how much different. When I was talking about shadows, I mean, even little gradations of texture or very, very slight shadows that you look at it and you'd never see it. But once you start processing it, convert it to black and white, and then you look at the photo and actually you can it often is visible. So it's quite surprising. And so it has really made me think a great deal more about how much do you have to pre-process these things to get them working effectively? It turns out like quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's really great that you're sharing this content, because for myself, I would say I have everything to learn, and not just about what is possible and not possible and what's so hard, but also how will users and customers kind of take what's there and interact with it in terms of their own expectations and where they want it to go. You know, I think up to now, for myself, I've seen demos that are very, I'm going to say, narrow into what they are being applied to achieve something that is successful, but it makes it hard to see what's the business case for it, you know. And here you come up with something that has a clear business case for, and as you pointed out, someone said, hey, if you manage to hook this up to Jira, or I'm going to be very, very happy to speak more with you. So and my mind is already racing into all of the different nuances of, okay, what if this and what if that, and I'm thinking, wow, that's how customers are thinking when they're exposed to this. And I know you said you were pleased with how you were able to cover some ground pretty fast in there, but also to me it feels like it could be easy to fall in a space where I would say, okay, we're done with this, and the customer lays onto this a huge bunch of requirements or expectations that will bring a great number of intricacies that will make it hard to implement.
Absolutely. Yeah. What I was originally thinking was, it'd be really, really cool is if I ran this off a Raspberry Pi, like with a camera, then you could just have the Raspberry Pi sitting and looking at it, looking at a board, and then updating in real time. And it's wouldn't be very difficult to do, because essentially all you're doing when a Raspberry Pi is doing that kind of image detection is you're basically just looking at the individual frames of images, and how often you check that is, you know, up to you. But yeah, it's sort of an interesting proof of concept that I kind of tried. It's sort of aligned with some of the things that actually I'm interested in product wise, though it's not specifically that, but it's anyway. So I've had fun making it so far.
Actually easier or harder than you thought it would be when you thought up this little exercise?
Overall, I would say it's been easier than I expected. Some of the defined details have been harder than I expected. I'd not expected. Yeah, I think to be honest, yeah, I think the handwriting recognition, I'd initially thought, oh yeah, that's going to be the easy part. That's like a solved problem. And actually, it turns out that that's a little. I don't think it'll take a massive amount of work to improve that quite dramatically, but I think the issue with different photographs of the same card with the same handwriting on it in different photographs that are at different angles, different lighting, different sizes, getting those interpreted 100% the same, I think that looks like that would be tricky. I mean, if the recognition is sort of, say, 95 to 97% accurate, which is probably about where I'll be able to get to, that's still a fair chunk of room for error. 3% error doesn't sound like much, but when you actually run with it for a while, it's noticeable. It's also in the tricky zone where if you had something that was only accurate 60% of the time, then you know to check it really, really carefully. But 97% sounds like it's really good, but it may not be.
just on a side note, we have at Claris, we have engineers working on trying to create an OCR add-on. The biggest challenge they're having now is actually localization in terms of how we write in different countries.
I can imagine, yeah.
Because basically schools, even though if you if you write script characters, every country in Europe, even years, has a different way of actually going about it.
Yeah.
And when you put it into your system, the engineer, if they work it and you have someone who's French looking at French text, when they look at English text, they have a different vision of it. So that's where you have complexity.
Yes. And before we even get to the issue of languages that have got left to right handwriting. So.
Yeah. Well, the main issue, the two issues that we have, so it's even in Europe is not that much, but with Japanese and Korean characters, it just goes ballistic. And having everything into one engine that could sort of read everything is getting quite hard.
I bet. Yeah. I bet. Yeah. Anyway.
Ian?
Yes.
Are there cases where for one given problem, to narrow down when you said the percentage of errors or things like that, what you'll actually need to do is to have like dual processing, have some like the exact same task or purpose be addressed by two different mechanisms, and see like, so that when you merge them together, then your chances are higher to reduce the error rate. Or usually is it more about sticking with one thing, but training the model for a larger data set?
Merging them, I suspect, would be quite difficult. I mean, I know you can use. There have been a couple of examples actually of people basically stealing API models from APIs, because basically what you can do is, given you've got you train a model by feeding it, generally by feeding it training data and labels, and if you you can actually generate that by firing them at somebody else's API. So there have been a couple of cases of people having their models essentially reproduced by a competitor, who basically signed up for their service and then used it as a training mechanism. Yeah. To be honest, there's still a long way I can go to making that better. And for the handwriting recognition, I haven't yet tried running it off one of the online services, but I probably should, because what I've got, what's running here, could actually be deployed really easily onto Amazon as a Lambda function sitting behind their API gateway. So anyway, I've got a lengthy list now of things that I can do to make it better. So.
Have you had to play with any kind of outside of FileMaker, the like live video feed processing? So say like object detection from a video. The reason I ask is that the value for me, the kind of business cases that I can think of, like they all involve video and not having the stop of having to take a picture, then process it, then do something with it. It's more on the fly alert or something like that.
To be honest, doing it with video it's essentially exactly the same process as doing it with a photo. Just you're basically looping through the frames of a video feed.
Yeah, because it's video.
Otherwise,
isn't it?
Now the speed then may come into it, but that's like that external tensor processor that I've got from Google. That's what it's intended for. It's intended for video applications where you need the model to run really fast, so you can do it at. So I think the examples they were giving was that if some of the models that could run at I think about 3 frames per second on a Raspberry Pi 4 using that processor could run at about 4 times the speed, like, you know, up to 16 frames per second.
Nice.
Give it a couple of years, or actually, you know, more heavy duty hardware, and then you're basically going to be able to do it pretty much real time. Which, I mean, well, autonomous cars, that's what they're basically doing, but they're throwing a ton of horsepower at that.
Yeah, so I saw some good things. I went to a Microsoft conference a couple of years back, and there was some good things, ideas for health and safety. So like image detection of hard hats, for example, and stuff like that. And that'd be really cool. Yeah,
that's not too difficult to do, that kind of stuff. It's really quite amazing, because like 10 years ago I would have said this is magic. And anyway, I should probably, I suspect, getting towards the end of my time, and really want to see what Douglas has to say about the new FileMaker server stuff. I've got to say, I installed the new server over top of my older one, and it was beautiful. It just worked. It's the first time I've ever installed FileMaker server without swearing.
Let's discuss that in a minute. Because I've got questions. Let him talk first. So, no, really good presentation, Ian. That's really cool. It's food for thought. There's a lot you could do with that. And I don't know whether anyone noticed in the actual chat, but Doug actually posted a session of the handwriting stuff that you were doing in TensorFlow as well in GitHub. So there was that message that was posted there as well, which looks really cool. So yeah, with that, I think it's perfect timing, really. I think we're bang on time. We're about 2 or 3 minutes early. So unless Doug isn't ready, you can kick off.
Perfect.
This works,
the ongoing process, Ian, of your learning through with the Core ML stuff. It's really valuable.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Cool. Can you all see my screen properly? Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So this is the boring session from Claris. Some of it is official, but then I'll go into a proper demo to explain to you what we've done over the last 6 months. So as you should be aware, maybe you've heard of that, but we've actually changed the way we do releases in the Claris product line now. And we are moving away from doing those yearly big cycles of updates in normally May. And the idea is to do whenever we have bug fixes or new features or new features that basically we build. Instead of waiting 6 months to a year to bring it out, we'll do it a lot quicker than normal. And so the first one we did was 19, and then we had 19.1, which by the miracle of marketing wasn't done in 1 day, but done across multiple weeks. So sometimes people are going, well, you could do everything 1 day will be easier. But the idea is we can stagger when we do the update so that marketing doesn't have that much work to do in one go, and there's less chances of having hiccups. So I'm going to quickly go through this keynote. It's really basic. It has all the messages and Claris just to get you to know. But one of the things that we're really working on is really sort of taking the pain of doing updates, of doing recurrent sort of work or development by giving you tools that hopefully will actually make it a lot easier for you to do stuff and potentially grow the community. So Srini, who's our VP of Product Management and Design, basically is trying to get everyone to sort of understand that what we're trying to do is really get you to be able to do more intelligent, more modern apps. And then one of the things that we are really working on is to make it easier for you to do, or for any of our clients, to do the update of the server from one version to the next. So one of the biggest, the real problem with FileMaker server before was when you had to do an update from, let's say, 17 to 18, you have to kind of remember all the settings, make sure you've actually sort of noted everything down, because it kind of loses everything. It takes ages, and most people actually don't do it. So the huge amount of backlog that we have in terms of customers, even sticking on 15 or 16 because they just can't actually have the time, can't be bothered to do it, makes it easier for us to try to get people to use the more secure version, which is always the latest one. So before I go into sort of server, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that we have 2 releases in the last 2 weeks. The first one was for FileMaker Pro, which is called FileMaker Pro 19.1.3. There is the same for Go, which is 19.1.3. The 2 stuff we actually brought in that one is the add-ons. And so again, we're showing you could actually use the Kanban board. We built 9 add-ons. So there's one for there's a basic calendar, there's a Kanban board, there is a simple chart, there's a couple of others. The idea is to basically bring more of the sort of features that people have been asking for so many years. I mean, I've been doing FileMaker for 22 years now. And like a calendar, I think everyone's been asking to actually get a calendar working inside of FileMaker that just people can use. And the issue that we had is for us to build inside the FileMaker with the native tools a calendar is just, in terms of engineering work, it's crazy because it actually doesn't bring much revenue. And then if we do one, to just keep the updates running is a bit of a nightmare. So the idea was to actually create this new system where we can really integrate proper JavaScript code inside your FileMaker solution and just to make it a lot better. So even though there's the like official or sort of Claris calendar you can use, we have a couple of partners out there who brought some really nice calendars add-on. So there's one from Seed Code, which is pretty cool. And we've got other partners that are actually creating various types of calendars that can be really easily integrated in your system and just will make it so much better than before. So if you haven't tried it, add-ons is fully built in with the latest version of FileMaker Pro. It's within your, I'll show afterwards quickly, but it's within your left-hand pane. You have the add-ons, just drag it on. And the whole system is built so that you can uninstall it quite easily. It just removes everything in the background for you. Just on the subject of add-ons, so the reason we haven't got that much in terms of documentation is we really work closely with Todd Geis from Geis Interactive, who actually did work on creating those 9 for us. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is actually we're working closely with partners that have actually created something that we could use versus us trying to actually create everything from scratch. So in the coming sort of month, you'll see new features that people have been asking for a long time, where before we were like, well, it's going to take us ages to build it. We're not really sure how much revenue we're going to get out of it. The idea says, well, if someone else has actually already built it, let's work with them to integrate that into a fully-fledged Claris product. So the 9 that you have calendar, barcode. They're just sort of generic ones. There's a few more that you can see on the marketplace. If you have ideas of stuff that you want to build, give us a shout and we can help you sort of mature the ideas. So if I go into, lastly is the new features that we brought into the Mac only, which is what we call the Quick Start experience, which is a preview of something that we're trying to do. And so it's a preview for us to figure out how we can get people, especially new users, to start creating apps inside of a FileMaker on the cloud directly or on the browser. And then the long term is basically how do we actually sort of make the whole FileMaker IDE, so your development area, a bit more 21st century and a bit more clever versus what we currently have, which is basically even though the design has been worked on, but it's basically an upgrade of an upgrade of an upgrade of what we used to have a long time ago. We just added new features. So if you look at your inspector, basically, is your inspector has always the same options. If they're valid, they are black. If they're not valid, they're grayed out. But unless you know where around it, most of the time you have to click on an object and it will give you basically in black what you can do, and it's grayed out. You can't actually use it, which even though we've been using FileMaker for a long time, then we think there's a lot of time where basically there's an action that you can't actually do through an inspector, and there's no point actually having here. So what we've done in this quick start experience is so FileMaker Pro on the Mac only, it kind of runs within FileMaker a web service where we could basically use like I think it's a Node.js that we have in the background, where you could actually have responsive design automatically, and only the options from the inspector that are valid for an object will actually appear in the inspector. So we're playing with it. The idea is to bring a lot more of what we can do in the browser potentially to the full-fledged version of FileMaker Pro. The other thing is we've done on that is we've actually, so everyone who's actually installing it, there's a survey, and we ask for feedback from users. Just says, does it work for you? Does it make sense? Is on the long run, is it going to be easier for you? So we're trying to sort of see where we can go. The idea is with the feedback to be able to actually make something better versus waiting for 2 years, working on it, and then we're rolling out and actually no one's using it because most of the stuff that we've done is not exactly what they're looking for. Then the most important stuff is actually FileMaker Server, which is 19.1.2. So 2 things we've done on that version. The first one is with official support for the version for Linux. So that's running on a CentOS 7 version, which is one we support. And the other thing is we've done quite a bit of work on the engine of the Draco engine in terms of how sorting, queries, the whole management is done in the background. So before I go to stuff, so for the server for Linux, basically the idea is it's so much easier sometimes to even install a Linux box than actually a Windows or even a Mac. So the Mac, in terms of options, you haven't got much stuff. You can either go for a Mac Mini or you can go for a Mac Pro. There's nothing really in between. For Windows, there's always the issue that you actually have to pay licensing to Microsoft for number of users you have on the Windows server, but even though you're not using any of Windows systems. And then in terms of updates, it's actually quite of a pain. And so Linux basically is, nowadays, a lot of companies are using it. It's a lot more stable. Performance-wise, it's really cool. And so we work quite a lot. And the idea was only have one version that we support, because what we're trying to do with this Linux version is it's the same version that we use for FileMaker Cloud. So any of the new features that we can build on the cloud for FileMaker Cloud first, once we've actually double-checked and triple-checked, it works really well on the Linux version, and whatever sort of changes have been done by the user, we can actually put in FileMaker Server. So there's a couple of new features in FileMaker Server that you only see in the Linux version, and we're not going to basically get to work on the Windows in the Mac, because the idea, it's a lot easier for us to work on it on the cloud, and then once it works, we put in that to the Linux version. For those who've seen it, basically for a long time, we said we were never going to do it again. Originally, basically sort of changed our minds, because he was going is if people are actually asking for it, and if it's something that we can do, why not do it? And so we've actually got engineers who work on FileMaker Cloud and FileMaker Server for Linux at the same time, so they can test various stuff. The way we've done it differently than before is actually, instead of actually setting differently, it is part of your FileMaker licensing. So if you've got a user license or any type of user license with us, you'll get the Linux version bundled with it. And then so a lot of stuff that we've been able to work on is the stability that we kind of lost in 18. What we didn't really lose is some of the stuff that we've done in the background made it that sometimes the machine could actually crash on 18. And so the engineering team has been working for the last 6 months on producing new blogs. And so we've got this Claris engineering blog. And then every month or so, or sometimes twice, we get engineers to actually write down a blog to explain some of the stuff that we've done. So normally they're quite sort of, they're basic, but the one we did for the latest version was to essentially try to explain what we did in 18 and what we did change in 19. For those who were really aware, on FileMaker Server 18, we introduced this new system, which we called page level locking. But there was 2 features basically built into all that actually were working together. So one of the features was called startup restoration. The idea was we were trying to replace the standby server that we had created in 16, which wasn't really working exactly the way we wanted to. And so startup restoration was basically creating 4 separate files of all the transaction going into your files, that if your machine was to actually go down or break down for whatever reason, the startup operation log files could actually rebuild all the files from scratch properly without any problems. And on top of that, we had this PLL engine, which was there to make it quicker when you were doing sort of queries by multiple users and various other stuff on the side. And what we did realize that even though on planning wise, it was kind of working for new solutions, the issue that we find is we had a lot of people basically that had solutions from FileMaker from about 6, 7, 8 years ago, where sometimes there was some corrupted data maybe in some of the backend file that when you put them through the new server, it was crashing and it was causing a lot of issues. So we tried sort of in the first release of 19, we disabled startup restoration, which disabled PLL as well. But it could be enabled if developers or partners knew exactly what was going on. And then with the latest version, we basically, it's still in there, but it's not being used. So we haven't really sort of completely removed everything, but it's pretty much removed. And so what we've done is we've created a new system where instead of actually us creating from scratch the way we think we should actually get the system to work, we're using standard industry standard tools to make this whole sort of integrity of how the database files work together a lot better. So hopefully you'll see there's a bit of quite a bit of difference, and you'll see that basically it kind of works better than before. The two things where you'll see a lot of or most changes is when you do index finds. So we call them parallel index finds. We don't call them multi-threaded, even though it's kind of in between multi-threaded and parallel. So we're not really saying that all the CPU is going to be used for one big query at one time, but it's kind of a mixture of all of that. And then we're doing a lot more sorting on the host. So a lot of the work that we did for FileMaker Web Direct, where when you do a search and then you do sort, this is done on the server. For Web Direct, we're bringing the same technology back into FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Go. And then we've done other sort of optimization inside to make this all sort of work a lot better. Two other thing, which is actually quite cool, is we've actually created 2 scripts that actually build by default into your system that you can enable. One is to actually purge the temporary database, which is something that we've actually seen regularly, where sometimes you have people saying, I've got ghost sessions, or it doesn't seem that my data from my machine is going properly into the system. So this is something you can run through a script schedule. And the other one is a verify all database, which is similar. You basically can actually have a script that verify all your databases whenever you want to. So this is it. Basically, this article has got more information. You can basically run through all of it if you want more, but it's actually quite useful. So I'll show you quickly in a demo how all that works. So a quick example. So first of all, I'm going to basically make sure my VMs are working. I'm not going to go through the install process of a Linux machine, but basically if you're using VirtualBox, Power Desktop, or even if you have like an Amazon account, you can set up a CentOS 7 Linux machine in about, I mean, it's pretty cool, 20 minutes. The install is actually quite straightforward. We've actually got a nice little guide on the website, which is the installation guide. There's a whole section now for FileMaker server to be installed on Linux. There's basically 3 steps. You've got to make sure that you've got a couple of tools that actually work. You download FileMaker server, you install it, and then you go through the process. So obviously, a lot more stuff is done inside the terminal app in Linux. So if you don't like typing stuff, then maybe it's not really for you. But there's a lot of partners actually that offer, I think, even online, complete videos that you just have to follow, and they'll get you to actually start playing with it. So at first, for those who were on the ETS or tried the preview, we had some issues in terms of actually getting the Node.js sort of engine working properly for the console. That's been fixed. So in Firefox now, you can actually get it to work properly, or you can use Chrome, whatever you prefer. So it has on Linux pretty much the same settings as the Mac and Windows. But as I was saying, is because it's a kind of a copy of what we have on FileMaker Cloud, there's a couple of services that we've actually added in the Linux version that you're not going to have in the Mac or Windows. One of those is the OData option. So this is only on the Linux version. So OData, for those not aware, it's basically ODBC with better security. So it uses an API. You can do a lot of stuff like you can do with data API, but it's basically kind of a more secure system than ODBC and being used by quite a lot of systems nowadays. And the other thing that you have in terms of external authentication is you can use what they call ADFS, which is Azure Directory Federated Services. So it's a newer system than the basic Azure Directory, which kind of gets you to use multiple systems to connect to your FileMaker solution. So the idea is we're trying to actually make this whole process of getting authentication from outside systems within FileMaker a lot easier. So if you use like FileMaker Cloud, you can use like system like Okta or Azure. We're trying to get all of the sort of federated ID system to be managed directly within FileMaker server to make it easier so that you don't have to create all the accounts back into FileMaker. So this is for larger organization, but we're trying to work on that as quickly as we can to make this a lot easier. So this is the two sort of features that you have. And if I go into the script schedule, basically the purge data. So when you create one, you select a system script, and you'll see that in the list you have those two scripts that are saved somewhere hidden in your machine, so you can actually modify them, because that was the first thing that people ask us in the ETS, was how to actually modify those, and we said no, you can't, because otherwise you're going to kill it. So you can basically create your own script and get it to your schedule. So if I run that one, basically it actually runs really quickly. I've only got cancel that, run that one. It runs really quickly, basically, if you have any a big temporary cache in the background. So this is basically Linux, works the same as the rest, kind of straightforward. We've worked as well on tons of updates for the OpenSSL to make it easier for the SSL to work properly. So hopefully you'll have less errors when you do that. The other thing I want to show you, as Ian was mentioning, is the update that we've done in FileMaker Server 19. So when you go to the FileMaker resource page for the downloads, you might have seen that basically we have an update file for the FileMaker Pro and for Windows, but for the server, it's the full installer. So to get that, basically, is all you have to do is you have to go to your what we call electronic software download page, where you can actually get the full version of the FileMaker. Because there again, the idea is instead of just doing an update and rewriting some part of the various sort of tools that we use, the idea was to actually remove a lot of the crap that we have from 18 and have like a better install that has more better tools and cleaner environment. So this is a FileMaker server that's running. I've got a couple of files running on that. I've set up a schedule backup. I've got some configuration that I've set up, so I've changed the name of my server. I've got no script running, but I've got, I think, logging in the background. I've enabled my data API. Stuff like that. So when you have to do an update from one version to the next, you kind of have to remember pretty much everything you've done to make sure it all works perfectly. The idea was like, well, if everyone, basically, we want everyone to be able to upgrade to the latest version, we have to make the whole process a lot easier. So basically, as you can do in 3 steps, if the demo works, it will be done in 3 steps. Otherwise, it won't take. So basically, the first thing you do is you'll have to stop your database server. So you click on that one. Just put that to 0 so it's quicker. Stop database server. And then you have to stop all the FileMaker servers, the services actually running. So there's quite a whole bunch. Basically, on the Mac, there's a command line that you can run. You can find it on our website. So let me just bring that one up. We have this article, and I'll put it in the chat for those who've never seen it. As you know, clarity, we have a lot of information, but we're not really the best for disseminating this information. So this is basically what you have to go through to make sure that your services actually stop completely on either your, so this is for Windows, and then for the Mac. Let me just put that quickly in the chat. Where's my machine type? So this is basically going to completely stop all the servers that I've got running. Make sure the right password. A bit twice because I just want to make sure it's working properly. That should be going away again. Hopefully now. So this is the full installer that I have. Just going to double click on that. Oh, sorry. If you start it, you can't stop it. Let's run again. So let's try again now. There you go. So it's too quick. So we've kept the same installer as before, and even though we've had some people sort of think it's a bit confusing, because if I'm doing an update, then some of the options should be removed. But we thought that it was actually for people getting used, just to make sure that they know that what the process of the installer goes through, so that you're kind of understanding exactly what it's doing. So my installer, because it can find the FileMaker server folder in my library folder, it can find all the settings, knows there's already a copy of FileMaker server that was running on that. So I just go through, accept the agreement. Installation, basically, it gives you just this option. And then deployment is basically doesn't let you sort of choose anything. So if I go back, I can't actually stop back. So my machine, if my machine was a FileMaker server master machine, it has to be the server. If it was a worker, it has to be a worker. I can't actually change that. The only thing I can do is actually change this user account. So most people actually keep it the same way. That's the only thing we allow you to change. Custom information, it's basically bringing the information from the license data that it has in your system. Same for the admin console, it's keeping the same as before. And I think it's going to basically allow you is maybe change where you want to do the install, and then you go next, type in your password, and it's going to go through it. The idea is smooth running, and it takes about 5 minutes to go from step 1 to the end. And if we're lucky, it will do the whole process in about 2 minutes. And so we're trying to sort of make this a lot easier, because we want to make sure that people actually move to the very latest version of FileMaker server, both on the Mac, on Windows server as well. Obviously, Apple's going to release very soon a new version of Mac OS, where they've done a lot of changes. They're really trying to get most people to actually really move as quickly as possible to what they call Mac OS 11. And so we need to basically be sure that people are actually on server 19, so that if there's any big bugs, we can actually just have to fix them on server 19 and not having to do it on 18. So close this, just make sure it works fine. So this is my FileMaker server. So it doesn't basically delete anything in the background. It kind of keeps everything. So if you had your startup restoration, you'll still find those files basically in the background. And then I can launch it. And as you can see, so I've got my system running, I've got my free files running, I've got my backup schedule, which is basically still there. I've got one preserve backup that I did today. If I go back into configuration, the name is basically the same as I put it. I didn't have any script schedule. And as you can see, it didn't ask me for my certificate. So if I had a new one, it would actually work with the old one. My data API was enabled. Didn't have this enabled, and pretty much all the same settings actually there. And then in terms of the license, it's actually used the one that I had before. So pretty much a standard copy of exactly what I had before. So the idea is smooth sailing, everything that was there before is pretty much there, exactly the same. So that was the idea, is if the process of actually doing the update is really easy, then let's make it easy for people to use the tool. And then the last option that we brought into, so we've done some stuff on SSL certificate. We've got some crypto, whatever, I can't remember what they called if you use them. But the one thing which is really cool is this new server statistics that was kind of there in I think 16, where we thought let's remove it because no one actually knows how to read it. And the idea was actually, people actually use it quite a lot. So this is quite useful to actually have it in there. So the stat log, which is this file, it actually has nothing. So I'm going to connect to it. Close those two files. So my local, I've got this one. I've got to open this file. And let me do the same again. I'll put a different file. So now if I go into my stat log, it's going to download that. So that's a log file. It's not really pretty, but basically what it's giving you in terms of information, and I'll just copy that into a FileMaker. Let me see if I got text edit. Come on, text edit. So this is giving you some information that you had before inside of the FileMaker server. Basically, it's giving you all information about sort of the network in and out, whether how much disk is working, your cache hit. The one thing which is kind of cool, it basically tells you whenever there's a pro client, or the type of clients actually connecting at any one time. So we're not grabbing like stuff like IP addresses or various stuff. We're just grabbing basically sort of a really basic information to let you know that this is the type of client that's connecting. So it's quite useful. Like if you have a concurrency sort of server and you want to figure out how many web direct clients are connecting to your machine on a daily basis, this will be basically a tool that's going to give you this information. So we're really trying to basically says whenever something is done on the server in terms of collecting or sending data, this is all we're grabbing. We're not trying to actually sort of give you who's doing what they're doing. This is more for the top call. So the idea, it doesn't take that much power from the machine, and it doesn't sort of try to kill it. If you want to see it live, I think you can do it, but it will be in your... Let's change again the way it works. Can't remember what it is. That's long. Anyway, you can actually view live if you want to see whenever someone is actually connecting to it. So this is quite useful when you're trying to figure out who's connecting, whether you have a lot of people, and whether you have any issues with your system. So if I remove that for 1 sec. So in terms of the way we do the PLL, the way we do parallel finds, the way we do sorting, I'm just going to give you a quick example of the changes that we've done, and it's more like into sorting. So this is the UK company house data, which has got like 4.3 million businesses. That was like from 6 months ago. So with COVID, maybe it's gone down to 3 million, I don't know. But it has pretty much every business that exists in the UK. And I've done a quick script, basically. It just doesn't do much. It does a quick search. Actually, let me do it on my Linux machine. So just a side note on the Linux, there's no Bonjour services on Linux. So you have to you can't actually find it through your local sort of systems. You need your IP address, which is that one. That hasn't changed. So this is the data. I've got this silly script that basically will just do a search for every business in Leeds. and then it's going to sort them by I can't remember what I'm sorting it by company number, so this digit, and then it tells me how much time it's taken. So if I open the same file, so I've got too many windows now. So if I open this file on locally, run the script, does the same search, find every business in Leeds. As you can see, you've got this sort of progression bar that tells you the process of how it's doing it. And locally, it takes about 8 seconds to actually run the process. If I run that on my server, you'll see the progressing. So basically, we've changed the progressing bar. So if it's doing a sort on the server, you'll have this basically progress bar, because we can't actually tell the machine when this is going to be done. And everything is basically being done on the server. So the data is actually being transferred to your machine, sorted locally, and then it's basically doing on the server, and then that sort in that order is basically being sent to the machine. The one thing which is kind of cool is if you basically tend to do a lot of the search and repeating sorting, because a lot of the work is actually saved in the temporary database of your server, this is going to get quicker. So on the server, the speed is going to increase, because if I do it again on my local machine, it doesn't basically save any information. Well, actually, it did this time. Let me try again. Let me go there. Normally, it should take a bit more time. No, it basically takes 2 seconds, but it's all the same when you do your demos. So eventually, this is going to get quicker the more you actually do it on the server, because it has a bigger sort of cache than this local machine. So normally, your cache on your local machine is about 128 meg, whereas the one we set is 512, and then you can increase that. So this is basically going to be increasing. If you have too many clients connecting at the same time, and then the server thinks that actually it's not basically going to be able to improve the speed of your sort being done on the server, you will get back this basically the progressing bar view instead of actually having the other one. So this is basically what we're trying to do to make sort of searching, sorting a lot quicker by doing more of the work on the server and actually less on the client, because we do find that basically is if you're doing your sort where the data is and then you send basically the end product, this is going to basically improve dramatically the speed. So we are working really to sort of iterate sort of new updates so that whenever we have bugs or we have problems, we can really sort of get those updates run quite quickly. And because of this new upgrading sort of installer, it's going to basically take a lot less time than before. So people are not going to be sort of as stressed and bothered to actually be able to do it, because they'll know it only take about 5 minutes to run, and it should be a lot a more stressful, a less painful issue. What I've got there, I'm just going to basically, for those who are not really using 19.1, the add-ons could be found on the left-hand pane. And then just to create one or select one, you can actually have one that are provided by partners that you can actually get from the marketplace. Or you could actually use the ones that we've created, and then you've got the old one. So if I use the one from One More Thing, you just click on choose, and then I can create a new form. And then you just drag it on there. It does everything in the background. And then if you want to uninstall it, you just click on that. You can remove any table occurrences, any tables that were created, and everything is completely removed. And that works exactly the same for all the same systems. So I've got a calendar for So Simple, same again. It's going to create everything in the background. So it's going to create, if I go into database, it's going to create the relationships. It's going to create the various tables that I need. It's going to create all the scripts that the system is going to use. If I decide not to use that, I just do uninstalled, and everything is actually gone. There's no trace of it, and so it's a lot easier to make sure that it all works fine. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do as well, because we do realize that when you have a file that's been running for a couple of years or more than that, 10 years, there's a lot of garbage being kept in the background. And so we're trying to find ways to actually limit problems that you can have with too much maybe old corrupted data, which is something the case that we realize when using like the migration tool, the data migration tool of the upgrade tool, that sometimes it goes berserk because you have very old code that actually sort of crashes some of the systems. So that was it on what we released for this time. There's going to be more, I think, maybe not before Christmas, but definitely sort of early next year we'll have new features that we'll bring out. So maybe not on server, but maybe run Pro or Go. So for the update, it's from 18 and earlier version of 19 to latest version. I don't think it does it from 17. Let's just check that. I think it's only from 18 or 19. Let me see if it says that on the. I should know that. Yeah, from 18 and 19, it doesn't do 17. I think it's mainly because we did rewrite some of the XML file in the background, which were causing the problems. So this page will have all the information that probably sort of need. There's a couple of data we've done in the background that don't do much, but we'll fix any of the issues that you could have. So start operation is you'll still the files, but you can't actually activate it or do anything to it. So if you don't have any use, you could actually remove those files from the system.
That's great to hear about all of those. Really interesting. Gary is gagging for questions, I see.
No, I'm let everyone else go first. That's fine.
So, we're slightly behind schedule, but what I suggest we have 10 minutes of questions now. Get as many of them in as you can, and then are you going to be hanging around for the virtual bar?
Yeah. I've got
we're
staying with you. We're looking after the dog, so I'm going to stay with you.
Yeah,
10 minutes now.
We'll be here as always, so that's fine. I can ask this. Well, I don't want to just ask those questions later. There's a couple of things. I think to answer Phil's question, I don't know whether I've answered it correctly, Doug, is the fact, can you update the CentOS by using the yum command? So, or do you have to download? Because I was thinking if you said you have to download the full installer, I don't see how it's going to call home. So.
How do you mean?
So if you go into Linux and do yum space update, you can update the entire machine. Is FileMaker part of that command set? That's the question. I think that's what you're asking, Phil, isn't it?
It wouldn't be.
Or if you could target the actual program itself as well, just via command line, really, I guess is the main thing.
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't do it because you have to actually get the installer from our website.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because you have to log on to the Claris portal for your software. You're going to have to download that onto there and then apply it and run it as an install command within CentOS.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't sell it as a repository.
Yeah, because you have to use the ESD link to be able to actually get the installer, so you won't actually be able to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for the time being.
Yeah, because the installer currently is not public domain; it's just tied to your account. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only question I wanted to ask, one of the questions I wanted to ask is on the OData stuff. I was curious about what version it's using, whether it's using version 4 or version 3. I don't know whether you know.
Blah blah blah. Is it saying it on our site?
I would imagine it's version 4 because version 4 supports JSON calls, so it's basically a JSON markup instead of XML. So I would imagine where FileMaker is going or Claris is going, it's probably going to be JSON.
I think it's I can check for that. I'll check with
Okay. The only reason why I'm asking is because compatibility to other things. That's all. So.
It should have it somewhere on our beautiful website, but there's all the stuff about this sort of new elliptic curve cryptography as a certificate, which is meant to be the new trend. It's been there for 10 years, apparently. It's more secure and it takes less space, so it's meant to make your whole system a lot snappier than data. It's Eden.
I'll find out and talk to you, Doug, and then I'll post it. We can get posted. I can add it to the as a strap text on the video. If anyone watches the video back, we can find it and get that answered. So that's fine. The only other question I had is, you said the server, if there's lots of requests to it, it could then basically run out of that sort of request process to do the optimized finds. I was curious what the parameters are for that. So at what level does it then give up and say, oh, sorry, I've had so many requests, I can't use that anymore, I'm going to have to go back and index again? Is there a parameter? Is there a setting? Is there something from Paris that says, is it 1,000 finds a minute? Is it 2 finds a minute? What's the parameter?
There's no settings. There's nothing you can control. It's really we've put into the systems what we think should be how it works. So it's leveraging basically in terms of how much of the CPU is being used, how much of the cache is being used, and how many sort of connection are coming at the same time. So there's variation of different stuff. What we're trying to, you probably, the engineering team is going to do a session on this, on the new options of the server midway through November. I think it might be November the 17th, where they're going to go more into details of how the PLL and everything kind of works. So once the date is finalized, we'll send that across, and then we'll get people to actually be able to ask questions ahead of time in terms of how it works and what it does. But they'll be able to explain a lot more stuff in terms of some of the sort of settings that we have and rest information. So I don't know if you saw, but ID put a link to Soliant where they're explaining some of the flags that could be used in the way that the server and Pro works. We decided not to put it on the website for public consumption because for like 5% of the market, they know what the server does and they know how to be able to sort of play with it. 95% of the time, people, if they start playing too much with it, they kind of kill it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I did a sort of section on how it's doing the sorting to get the engine to do whatever it wants. And then eventually, once we have better understanding, especially feedback, so because we need basically a lot of feedback from users. A lot of the time, it's negative feedbacks because it's people calling customer support saying, my server doesn't work, your installer killed it, can you fix it? The idea is to get positive feedback from partners and the community to say, this is ideal because of this and this and this. And so this is what we're trying to get to.
I agree that post that Heidi put on, I've read that article and it's a very comprehensive article. It's good, it's very good. So the only thing I would say to the group, and nothing wrong with the add-ons at all in the community, just be careful of the size of your database. That's all. If you go and do an add-on to saying it's going to do a defined fields change, like I've got one database, I do a defined fields, it's 45 minutes on the server if I do a defined fields change for it to apply that, because it's the size of the system. So do bear that in mind to the whole community, what you're adding on. If you're adding a calendar to even a modest system, yes, it's going to be a minute, it'll do the defined fields, it'll change it, and you can take its stuff away. Just be careful if you're doing it on a very large system, that's all, because it will go and make those changes. And correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, whether or not it'll make those changes, because you're still going to have to do a defined field, put tables in, do the links, do the work. So if your normal defined fields commit on a very complicated system takes 10, 15 minutes, you pressing the delete button to undo that is going to take another 10, 15 minutes to undo it, and do bear that in mind. So, but no, the functionality is really good. It does work well.
Yeah,
so and I like the idea of doing the update. I'll let you know when we update 18 to 19, which I'm tinkering on. I was waiting for the Linux server to migrate, so I might go to Windows first, and then migrate to Linux. So I will give you the feedback of how it works. So.
Cool, that'd be great. Yeah, and then if you don't want to use like the VM on your machine, you can set up a CentOS Linux box on Amazon, on the free tier, and takes about half an hour to go through the steps, and it's a good way to get into that. So and then CentOS, even so, we support it 7.8, I think now. It kind of, I think it works on 8, but I think there's a couple of issues depending on which installer you got. But it's kind of really straightforward, and it is actually quicker than because Linux runs so little stuff in the background. Then obviously within a basic machine, it will just run properly. You just need a 64-bit CPU. You could use AMD's or Intel. So I'm not really sure. You wouldn't be able to use a Raspberry Pi, even though I think Raspberry Pi you can put some weird stuff now. Yeah, any decent.
We did that. We did that a year ago, or about a year and a half ago, where we basically decided to look at CentOS because we knew it's the platform it was going to go on. So my Zabbix server that's doing all the monitoring, I installed on CentOS so I could get at least familiar with the operating system. And it's not a bad idea to do that if you don't have a monitoring server, install Zabbix, install it on CentOS if you've got a VM or some way of installing that. It gets you familiar with the command line a bit quicker, and then when you come onto the server, it'll be a lot more straightforward for everyone.
So replying to Christian, it doesn't work yet for the RM support, nor the next version of whatever Apple comes out with. We're working with the engineering team from the other side to see how quickly we can bring it. So we'll see what Apple Silicon is all about, whether it can handle Linux code at first, and we'll see how it goes. But the engineers are, I think, slaving away to get this working as quickly as they can.
Well, the Linux for ARM would be nice if so you could use any new servers based on the ARM architecture, like a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
And the Mac ARM support is on the other side is I think quite urgent, as Apple just released a date for their new keynote next week.
Yeah. So the keynote doesn't mean that basically the product is out.
Well, you don't know. Maybe they have
but we've got. I know the guys in the engineers. They've got the DTK kit to be able to actually explore it.
Yeah, I have it too.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, they're still working on it. It's just we're waiting for kind of to sort of see exactly what type of machine will actually really come out. Because we'll see. So they're working on it. That's all I can say.
One thing I posted in the chat, which when the court has tried to get out there, is that ADFS is not just Linux. It's exposed. It's the only place that's exposed in the admin console. But you've been able to use ADFS with Windows and Mac for quite a while now.
Yeah. So it was the OpenID principle. So the way we've done it is slightly different on that one, because you can't really get everything to work without hacking inside your XML file. So for those who basically people have been,
it's not really hacking. It's
you kind of sort of telling it one thing, and then it basically, because you're modifying an XML file, if you do any update, it can actually sort of kill it. So basically, for people who don't know, but when you try to log in with a federated system, you have to tell it which kind of field or group or scope, whatever it's planned on. So we're trying to sort of get it to be as broad as we can and to work with as many systems that we can. But like if you've tried with ADFS in one login, it doesn't really compute 100%. So, but we're trying to get there so that it's easier for people to just do a couple of changes and get everything to work without any problems in the background.
Cool. How are we doing for time, Joel?
So if we have time for one more.
Yeah, shoot.
Something intriguing was mentioned. FileMaker server multi-threaded. That's a performance enhancement, a good thing. And Doug, you mentioned the FileMaker 18 rolled out the startup restoration, which is a work in progress at this point. During the Under the Hood presentation, about 2 minutes in, Ryan Manook just dropped a sentence in there where he said that there was some multi-threaded aspect that existed prior to 18. And I wonder if you know anything about that.
Yeah, so engineers doesn't want us to call it multi-threading. They want to call it parallel. It vaguely does the same. It's just the vision that people have of multi-threaded is if you have 4 CPUs and you do a request, it's going to use the 4 CPUs at the maximum level of what they can achieve. Whereas the parallel is more about, in conjunction, basically all the CPUs are going to try to work together to give you a better level. So it's not 100% multi-threaded, it's not 100% parallel, but engineering is preferring that we call it for the time being parallel finds, parallel sorting than multi-threading. It's just
So
not
my understanding, and maybe I said this wrong initially, is that what Ryan said is that there was a multi-threaded aspect when, and only when, you had a multi-file system. So one of the decisions that we need to make frequently in building out systems is how many files to have. And he seemed to be saying that more files means more, whatever you would call it, that it would be optimized from a performance point of view to have more files in a pre-FileMaker Server 18 environment. It was 2 minutes in.
Oh, you mean pre-19?
Pre-18.
Well, in 17, well, we had like the very early level where we were doing it in page level locking, which meant that, yeah, it was better to actually have more files than big files. But the PLL the first route of the PLL that we went for, and then I don't know if you remember, but we had one of our engineers did a session like 3 years ago trying to explain what we're trying to do. And it was confusing because we weren't really sort of using an entry standard to actually create that. So we've changed the way we're doing it, make it sort of in the long term easier for us to sort of bring new features and making sure it's actually working properly. So you can have a bit of it in 17, but it's not really multi-threading. It kind of is multi-thread because it's trying to use multiple CPUs at the same time. But it's not what people assume as multi-threaded when they do queries. If you do queries in SQL Engine and all the systems, when you have multi-threaded, where it's really using the full power of the CPU to do request, we're kind of always leveraging to make sure that we can have more clients connecting to the system and doing the queries, which is why we're calling it parallel, not multi-threading. So I'm pretty sure once engineering is happy to say that we can call everything multi-threaded, we'll have it on our website saying FileMaker is finally completely multi-threaded when you're doing queries and stuff like that. I know it's confusing, but engineers,
it's all good. We had a system deploying to the enterprise, and at one point in the system build out, we split it from a single file initial build out, which we were doing for speed, and we split it into multiple files to pick up a performance that we're hearing about, although it hasn't been quantified, but it's something greater than 0, plus windowing and security. Anyway, I appreciate the answer.
Yep.
Great. Shall we take any other questions onto the virtual bar later? And we're a bit behind, but then again, Dimitris hasn't joined us yet. So, Robert, are you ready to jump in there?
Yes, now I am. I'm sorry, I was muted.
It's ready to go.
So I'll be presenting my screen.
Okay. Whilst he's doing that, I just wanted to say, Doug, thanks very much for doing that and coming along and talking to us all. It's really useful.
Cool.
Yeah. Cheers, Doug. Thank you. Superb.
All right. Well, most likely you've been hearing a lot about add-ons and JavaScript and other fancy stuff. And this presentation is a bit more in the back to basics kind of thing, but it doesn't mean that it's any less important. So this is about making your code more readable and aiming for ending up in a space where you'll be thanking yourself and being more able to figure out what it is you were thinking when you wrote your stuff last. So I'm Robert. I'm a father who sings choir and likes to code with Claris FileMaker. And I'm saying out there, I am lazy, but hopefully in a good kind of way. And so I'm gonna try and promote for you to also be lazy in a good kind of way. I've been doing some FileMaker consulting since 2005, and I've launched Accolade plus Accolade in 2019. My company's tagline is "Communication is everything, and everything is communication," and this applies also to code. So our main objective today is to see that we push comments down our list of tools we use when making our code more readable. I'll argue that comments are one of the biggest threats to making our code more readable. They're basically too easy to use and rely on. If we look at them, we can almost think that they're the only tool we can use to make our code more readable. I'm not completely against them, but I believe that there are some habits we have that are worth rethinking and fighting off. So quick couple things about our agenda. We're going to look into why we should pay attention to this. And we're going to discuss naming. We're going to look at some tools. And if we are to use comments, well, then we should know when to use them. We're going to also discuss some gadgets to keep close by, and then parting notes and discussion as time allows. So full disclaimer, all of this is very subjective, and I don't want anyone to be offended or anything like that. Some of what I'll be showing is based on my own practice and is always changing. It can also be derived from things that have been shared in the community, and it could be hard for me to give proper credit. Revisiting how we write our code is something we should keep in mind. There's no point in time where we can say, okay, I'm done. I'm gonna not think about this anymore. Some concepts are long-lasting. I'll be borrowing from Jerry Robbins' 2014 DevCon presentation, and I hope you like quotes. Speaking of quotes, what is good code? So all relationships are based on trust. Customers, employees, partners, where we eat, what we eat. It applies to code also. How can we trust something we do not understand? How are we going to understand it if reading it is not making that any easier? So trust is really what it's all about. Why we should care? Well, there's quite a hefty cost if we do not care about that stuff. I'm pretty sure we all think that we care about it, but do we know even why we should care? So still liking quotes. Here we say, any fool can write code that a computer can understand. Good programmers write code that humans can understand. So in other words, our job is not just to make stuff work, but to make things make sense. Okay, people looking at this should, at our stuff, should know what it's all about. And also, one man's crappy software is another man's full-time job, and that's not a fun job to have. No one wants that type of job security, so let's keep that in mind. Obviously, we should care for others, okay? Not for the reputation kind of way, but honestly, for others. Code is alive, it's not static. People will be touching it, will want to interact with it, change it, and just understand what it is you are thinking, to validate it or to take it to the next level. And doing so, they need to understand the inner workings. So let's make that easy. Also for ourselves, obviously, stuff changed over time. We are called to revisit things that we've done a while back. And how far back is a while back? Well, to some it could be 6 months back. To some it could be 2 weeks ago. It all depends. But basically, we want to make sure that when we are looking at something, we don't really want to rely on our memory. We want to rely on making sure that we understand what we've written, because it is explicit. So what happens then if code we have in our hands is not code that we understand, is not code that we can trust? What goes on from there? Well, in terms of maintenance and updates, I'd rather not touch it. So from there, what's going to happen next? It's not going to be alive and well. It's going to gather dust. It's going to lay still on a shelf until someone pulls the plug on it. So that's not what we want. Trying to figure out if it's working. I don't know. Maybe. That doesn't sound too good to hear. Not from anyone, and not for someone who's supposed to know if it is working. So there's no single tone that's going to make that sound nice. So yeah, let's write the code in a way that makes the answer to that question easy to get to. And lastly, the other thing that can happen is we'll want to start over or fall victim to the IKEA effect. So oftentimes the code can be working just fine or working perfectly, and still we're not going to be able to understand it. And as a result, we're not going to trust it. So we'll put it all to the trash and start over with something that we build ourselves, just because we're more familiar with it, because we know that doing it ourselves, we're going to know the ins and outs, and we'll feel confident that it does what it needs to do. But oftentimes we forget that this comes with a bunch of testing and debugging as well. So notice the nuance in between working perfectly and good code. So I'm not saying that it's good code that's going to fall victim, because good code is code that can be trusted. And if you trust the code, you're not going to take it to the trash. So another good way for code to lose trust is if you have comments that are inconsistent with what the code does. Comments can be a lot of maintenance, and I don't like maintenance. So I don't know if you're lazy like I'm lazy, but if it can be avoided, let's try and find a way for that. So the IKEA effect is not just some funny word that someone came up with. It's documented. If you look it up on Wikipedia, and you'll find a page that says it's the effect that comes into play when people are placing a greater value than normal just because they took part into creating something. So just like with furniture that you're gonna assemble yourself, well, with code is the same, because you put it together yourself. You're gonna see it as having more value than if it's code that you haven't built yourself. There are also other effects that come into play. Those are the mere exposure effect. Again, an effect that says you tend to develop a preference for things that you're familiar with, and that's completely understandable. That's something we go by every day in our lives. And one last thing is also the Dunning-Kruger effect. So that one is something where people with a low ability at a given task tend to overestimate their ability. So if you're not familiar with something, you think that something is easier than it really is. So that's something that really applied to me when I had to estimate the time I would spend to put together this presentation. So also, where do we spend our time? So Robert C. Martin says we spend 10 times the time we spend writing code into reading code. So the ratio of time spent reading versus writing is well over 10:1. So that means when we spend 1 hour writing code, we're bound to spend 10 hours reading code. If we spend 10 hours reading code, we're bound to spend 100 hours reading code. That's a lot of time. And also on the right side here, another thing that is kind of funny to look at is when people learn programming languages, they will learn how to write it even before they learn how to read it. You know, they'll get shown the basic syntax, and then they'll say, "Go try this," you know, and put stuff together. And I mean, it's not something we would do with any other languages. If I'm learning Spanish, I'm not gonna learn how to write it before I've learned some reading. So that is very, very different. And are we ever learning how to read programming languages? So anyway. If we think we don't need to make our code more readable because no one is going to pay attention to it, well, Steve McConnell says, let's make sure we're not confusing cause and effect. And that is indeed food for thought. So let's look about naming and why obsessing is a good thing. I don't want you guys to worry. I'm not going to be forcing a naming convention on you. It's not what it's about. Although having a naming convention is a good thing, so make sure to have one. But into what we'll discuss, it's not about the specific naming. So Phil Carlton says there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. Now, I know nothing about cache invalidation, and I'm sure it is a nightmare. But naming things is deceptively simple on the surface, but it can be really hard. It is our most powerful tool, I think. Naming is what we can use to be understood, and as designers, naming shows our intent. Naming tells a story. So how should we be, what should we be thinking about when we're naming objects? Well, first, let's be good parents. FileMaker lets us rename things left and right very easily, but I'd say we should not be relying on that feature too much. It could be tempting to say, yeah, I'll change the name tomorrow or whatever when I'll figure a better name, you know. But next thing you know is that's not happening as quickly as you thought, if ever. And it's just basically a bad habit. You know, we would not rename our own children, right? If they go old and they, like, say, hit 5-year-old, and you have Sam, and you say, well, Sam, happy birthday, and from here on you'll be called Fred, because Sam was really a bad name for you and Fred is much better. No one does that. So also, renaming can just plain break stuff. Layouts, scripts, and fields. It used to be that everything would follow, but we have way more moving parts now than we used to. So server scheduled, FMP URLs, API calls, all those things can be somewhat sensitive to the names we're using for our objects. So renaming is something that we have to be more mindful about now that there could be all of those strings that we'll need to make sure remain tied down. The good news is we name stuff all the time, so we're bound to improve if we pay attention. Custom functions, tables, fields, table occurrences, layouts, scripts, there's really a bunch of things where naming comes into play, up to styles, menu sets, custom function arguments, parameters that we're sending in a script, unless you're using something that is position-based. But even then, we'll talk about that a bit later. So what a name is not. Well, a name is not an abbreviation, okay? I know a lot of time we're facing drop downs that we feel are too narrow, and for that reason, we're tempted to abbreviate our names. But all in all, I would say let's avoid abbreviations. Basically, it takes a ton of context to be able to figure out what an abbreviation means, and no, we can't assume that the reader is going to have that context in hand. And just to demonstrate, if you take a word and you ask 5 friends to abbreviate that word, well, you're going to have 5 different answers, is my bet. Now take that and flip it around. Take the abbreviation and ask five people what's the actual word behind the abbreviation, and you're gonna get something that is even crazier. So abbreviations are not a way to save time if what you're trying to do is spare your fingers from having to hit a few extra keystrokes. I'm going to say let's look elsewhere. A name is also not a shorthand or an acronym. So there are a bunch of software that are available if you want to expand keystrokes into whatever string you want to replace it with. And I'd say let's not have names be shortened to replace that software. I came across a system where the developer chose to use a custom function that would be called GSP, and a bunch of other custom functions of the same that were really just re-implementing native functions. Like GSP was get script parameter. And by looking at the code, every time I would hit something that was foreign to me, and I had to know how was it that he had abbreviated or concatenated any given function. And it's like I had to be reading his mind every step of the way. It was very, very difficult for something that was, in the end, re-implementing native functions. So it served really no other purpose than that. So that was a disservice, I think, that that took place. A name is also not part of an arbitrary series. So if we have stuff like what you see down here, script 123, variable 123, or script XYZ new, old, new to, copy 2, I'm sure you've seen some of that stuff. So that's I was saying I like being lazy, but this is the kind of lazy that we should not be giving into. So a name should be pronounceable, and it should be easy to search for using our preferred DDR tool. Let's look at some examples. So the bad stuff. $PC, $prodcat, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. $D with a comment next to it, GSP that we've discussed, and an if function with other calls within. So what would be good alternatives for all those? So PC, let's use something like product category. There's no way, short of having a ton of context, that you could have said, yeah, I know that $PC means product category, you know. And now that I've mentioned $PC was standing for product category, I'm sure that you know that $prodcat really stands for product catalog, because, right, it can only be expanded into this one word that we have in mind. Now that variable I didn't want to pronounce earlier, who would have guessed that it's really filtered student names? Next to no one is my bet. So $D with a comment. So that one is interesting because some people might say, well, I'm using a comment. That's more readable, right? Well, I would say, tell me, are you going to place that comment everywhere you used the variable? Because if not, then you're asking for the reader to hunt for that information just later on. And if you are going to place that comment everywhere, well, then maybe you should just drop the comment and use a variable name that spells it out. So for GSP, I said, well, let's use what is native. Now the last one is a bit different than the others because it's not really about naming. All of what is there is stuff that is native to FileMaker. You don't get to choose what it is called and what is being returned. But if we were to do a custom function to serve the same purpose, just by looking on how that custom function is named, you can know already what to expect out of it. What's the return going to be like? So custom functions are a great way to address those kind of issues where we have a long calculation that is a bit difficult to read on the eye, where it's going to come over and over again. Let's make a custom function and be done with it. Other recommendations. So for Booleans, let's start our stuff with markers that say is or has, like is paid. Arrays and lists should use plural. Function scripts, let's use a verb and a target. And for everything, it's all about consistency. So let's not switch between styles within a single system. If you're using fetch and retrieve or get and set and read and write and update, create new, it's going to be a whole mess. Let's just stick to one. Same for prefix and suffix, upper characters and lower characters. Make sure that if you have a convention, that it can be obvious to the reader when it stands, and not being like, oh, it looked like it was a gamble on this one. You know, we rolled the dice again, and this is what came out. So let's be specific. Let's be explicit. No one wants to guess what we were thinking. If you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it again? This applies to naming too. Bad names are like raindrops. A single one is not going to ruin your day, but you never receive a single raindrop. The first one you see tells you there is more to come. Just sharing a little something personal here about my script variables. When JSON came out into the product, I liked it so much that I started naming my variables the same as the JSON path of my script parameter, something like invoice, bill to, zip code. One warning though, I would say do not extend that into fields, because the data API uses field names as keys in the resulting JSON. So you basically having dots into the names of the keys that you're getting back is stuff that is not too nice to have to deal with. So spare yourself the trouble. More tools. So if all you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail. And by hammer, what I mean here is comments. So let's look at what else we can use aside from naming on one side and comments on the other that can still help us improve how readable our code is. Good code is like a joke. It needs no explanation. I'm sure you've seen this on a t-shirt. So it's funny quote, but I think it says a lot about what we should aim for. One thing is, let's avoid magic numbers. So what's a magic number? Well, let's look here. We have a loop, and we say if I is greater than 52, then we're going to do something, and then we're going to increment our loop counter. But wait, 52, what's that 52? 52 what? Is there a way for us to know? we don't have the context here. We need to go and look into the actual loop for the stuff that gets done to try and figure out, oh, wait, okay, we're talking about 52 this or 52 that, or here is why 52 is the number being used. So if we do something like this, set a variable week count, and then put 52 in there. And then for the same loop, we say exit loop if $i is greater than week count. Then it's way more readable. We know right there that we're looping on weeks. Same thing, if we say set variable to deck size, and we put the same number, 52, and have the exact same loop. Well, now we know that we're dealing with cards, or maybe we're dealing cards. So yeah, just let's avoid hard coding the numbers into our calculation. I'd say it's not everything that you have to put into a variable. Like, don't go and do that with zeros and ones and all that stuff, like, or hundreds, or how many hours there is in a day, and things that are very obvious. You don't do this with, but things that can require context. This is a good way to give the proper context. There was an example online for me that really drove this home, and it was an example of two functions using the number 151. One was, have I caught them all? And the other one was, how many more do I have to catch? So the reveal was that 151 was total Pokemon, and all of a sudden, then I knew what the functions were about, but before knowing that, there was no way for me to understand that. So figure out what's your total Pokemon and go and name it. Let's go easy on negation. Okay, I don't know if you ever felt like hide when should be show when. I know that I've fallen victim to that oftentimes. I go and I write my calculation in there, and then I come back to browse mode and I test, and I'm like, how come it's not doing what I wanted to do? And then I throw parentheses around, and I put not in front, and then I do the same, and then it works. So it's just, our brain is wired in a given way where we deal with negative stuff fairly less often than statements that are written in the positive. So when you have to use it, but make sure that it is done when it is intuitive, because otherwise you're forcing the brain to switch in between one mode and the other, and that clash can slow the reader down. Let's use indentation. So if we look at something just basic like name concatenation, okay, the calculation up above is okay. I mean, no one's gonna spend 3 hours looking at it to figure out what it's doing. But again, no one's gonna argue that if we use indentation like this, it's gonna be that much more readable. And note how here, the comment is there only to preserve the pattern of things being in pairs. The comment serves no other purpose. So to the eye, spacing is going to make it so that we're going to understand much faster what is going on, where it is we have to read up to, and say, okay, this is now new information that I can consider be different. Do use indentation, but not too much. Okay, so if you're writing a script and then you're down 5 levels into if, else, if, loop, and other things that will push your code an extra notch to the right, well, at some point it is difficult to figure out what level of indentation you're dealing with. So just keep that in mind. Do use white space in your calculations. So the example on the left is pretty basic, okay? And things get more ugly when your code starts to wrap from one line to the next. But basically, again, throwing just an extra carriage return in there, making sure that you get the white space will give you, in this case, things that are in pairs and much easier to read than if it's just a big chunk where you have to figure out where things are breaking from one another. White space in scripts. So this has been introduced long ago, and there's no reason not to use it. It helps divide your scripts into subsections, and it invites to title your subsections with comments. And we know that naming is a good thing because it tells a story and it carries the intent. So make sure that you do that every now and then, that you don't make a script that is just a huge wall of code and there's no white space within. Let's use custom function. So we had the example about the is running on server. Custom functions are great. They're custom. That's what they're all about. They are dry, so when we update them, everything follows. It's wonderful, but more than anything, we get to pick the name. So the name is what it's all about, and custom function is a great place where we get to say, well, this is what it's going to be called because I choose so. And I would say there's a lot of custom functions that you're going to be lifting from things that are public online, but do not hesitate to rename someone's custom function. You know, there's not going to be a custom function police coming to your door and saying, hey, what is it you did here? You cannot rename that custom function. So-and-so is the author and he expected the name to stay the same. No such thing. Just make sure that the name is relevant for what you do with it. And also keep in mind that if you rename a custom function that is very popular and that people are using left and right and sharing code about, well, that could be a bit more of a slippery slope, because every time you're going to be pasting code that is leveraging that, the custom function is not going to get recognized into your file. So you have to determine when it is that you're going to be renaming and when it is you're not going to rename. But all in all, the name is really the key feature that can make something readable. So do not hesitate to rename. Also, we should use let statements. So that too has been around forever. I think FileMaker 7, if I'm right. So the calculation above is not something super fancy. It's just doing a basic calculation. And if you do have a let statement, well, you get to split out every little part of it. And then just by saying, okay, well, we're outputting the extended cost, then you need to say no more. If then you want to know how is the extended cost figured out, you can backtrack and see everything. But if all you have is just this one line of thing, then you're forced to read it to figure out what it is. And again, speaking of magic numbers here, 100 to 1, those are not magic numbers in this example. Let's avoid null values in our calls, and I would even push that maybe further sometimes to say let's avoid values altogether. So if we have something that does a send mail, okay, we see that a lot in plugin calls, and we see it also with script parameters. So an example here, we say, okay, this is the send mail. It's going to send mail with the following arguments, and we can figure out what it's using and what it's using it for. But if we have to say, okay, can you add a BCC? Well, you're kind of stuck. You have to figure out, okay, if I have to add a BCC, maybe it's because BCC is not used already in there. Maybe it's one of the blanks, maybe not, and go and pick which one is the right one. If you have something where everything is spelled out, adding a BCC is really simple. You just make sure that you initialize the variable beforehand, and when the actual call happens, you don't even have to change the function call. It's already there. It's going to use whatever you've provided. So that's much more readable and much more maintainable. Same for script parameters. If you're using something that is position based, here we can read, okay, it's going to use the ID of a contact and then something, and then it's going to say, okay, it's a cell number, and then here is the number. But if I say, hey, James, what's that script's second parameter again? Well, there's no way to know. You need to go look into the script and figure out what the second parameter is used for to really know, oh, here is what we're talking about. Whereas if you had written your the exact same parameter in this fashion, you'd know that, okay, it's using a contact ID. It's also using a flag that says if that phone is going to be the primary phone or not, and then the phone type and the phone number. So this is really leaps and bounds more readable than having to figure out what we have on the left, especially for null values, but sometimes even for existing values. Let's avoid perform, find, restore. I would say it is just frustrating for me when I come across something like that and I want to read the script and know what the query is, and I have to do that extra double click to figure out what it is that the find is performed against. Let's just spell it out. Let's just have regular script steps, set fields, new record, omit, and so on. If the reason the script is not behaving the way I expect, hidden behind a restore option, I better not know where you live. And that is also tying to a quote that we'll look in a little later. For script parameters, let's make sure that looking at the script, the actual script, we know early on what parameters are expected. So in the header part of our script, we should have something that spells out, okay, here is the parameters that you need to pass in for this to work. If you are raising a script parameter in line 56 of your script, what you can bet on is that someone will call your script and will not have been sending the right parameter. So also on that topic, some people like to name their scripts with the parameters part of the name of the script. You know, they'll put the parentheses there and they'll say, oh, here is what the script is expecting. I myself shy away from that just because there is a hard limitation of 100 characters on script names, but it could be very well working for you. So here's the quote I was referring to a little earlier about knowing someone's home address. Always code as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath who knows where you live. This is a funny quote, and a lot of what we don't know about it is where it's from. So it turns out when it was initially mentioned, it came with the extra bit code for readability. And it was mentioned in 1991, not like 2015, not 2012 or 2005, 1991. So people have been thinking about this for a good little bit, and I'm sure even before then. It is harder to read code than to write it. Not obvious to come to that conclusion, but so true. And it ties directly into the quote that we looked into earlier, where we said any fool can write code that a computer can understand, and good programmers will write code that humans can understand. This says the exact same thing in a slightly different fashion. And Joel Spolsky knows what he's talking about. He's the founder, I think, of Trello, and the co-founder of Stack Overflow, if I'm right. So General rules and recap. Explain your magic tricks. Secrets are not welcomed. There are no bonus points for being sneaky, clever, fitting all your code in a single line. Saving keystrokes will not save you time. It will cost more time. And good naming is more than half the battle. We should avoid magic numbers. Use white space and indentation without nesting too much. Custom functions and let statements are your friends. Avoid values in your calls. Never make the reader guess. Spell it out. Find requests and variables initialization should be really easy to read out and to figure out. By the end of all this, you should have your own writing style. Your own does not mean unique. It means that you've made it your own and it flows when you write code. If a reader looks at your code at some point, what comes next in your code will be predictable because of the trends and patterns it follows. The way things are will become what the reader expects. That is when you can say mission accomplished. Now about comments. Something else that is deceptively easy on the surface. We think we know where and when to use them, but not necessarily so. Code never lies. Comments sometimes do. So code can only do what we tell it to do. Comments are not for the computer, they're for us. They drive nothing about our code. Every time we write a comment, if it is about what the code does, if the code is updated, our comment is at risk of being outdated. Again, if the comment we write is about what the code does, if the code is updated, our comment is at risk of being outdated. Comments tell us, comments that tell us what the code does are heavy maintenance. And again, maintenance for someone who's lazy is not something I want to have more of. So what it is we're given in the FileMaker space in terms of comments? Well, we have comments for fields. We have script comments where you have to pay attention if you do some things that are multi-line because the support is different on the different platforms on Mac and PC. We have end-of-line comments in calculations like this and block comments. And we also have notes on the relationship graph. So good comments will tell us why. They're not going to tell us so much about how, but they're going to tell us why. They're going to let us know the intent, what it is we're trying to accomplish, and they're not going to restate what is already stated by the code itself. And for variables, they will let us know what is acceptable in terms of a range, if it's a date or a number field or whatever, and or maybe valid entries if it's a specific list, or even the unit of measure in case that's not already part of the variable name itself. So bottom line comments can be informative. They can be warnings, like for instance, someone who says in the code, this performed script on server will run for 5 minutes, and that is normal. You know, there's no way that just by looking at the code, I can know what to expect in terms of how long is that going to take for the server to run. So that is the kind of thing that is helpful to see in a comment. They can also be to-dos. They are temporary by nature, unless you believe that nothing is as permanent as the temporary. So just make sure that if you leave yourself to-dos in there, that you come back, you do it, and then you remove that that comment. So basically, code cannot explain why the program is being written and the rationale for choosing this or that method. Code cannot discuss the reasons certain alternatives approach were taken. So those are all good things to spell out in comments, so that people who will be following our trails will have an easier way to figure things out and can see if we took the right turn when we had to choose in between left and right. Incorrect documentation is often worse than no documentation, and that is not only because being misled is a complete waste of time, but more importantly, because it erodes the trust relationship we have with the code. And everything is about trust. So let's look at a couple gadgets. If they're good for Batman, they must be good for me also. So I suggest you pack these on your adventure. The Monkey Bread software plugin. So the stuff I'm mentioning here is free and it is working on a Mac. You can have the paid version as well. This is also going to work. If you're on Windows, though, I suspect those will not be working for you. But it can check variable declarations and warn about unknown variables in your script. It lets you customize the colors you use for syntax colorization. If you select an if step in your script, it's going to select the magic or highlight the matching end if step in your script. Same for loop and end loop. You can do find and replace in a given calculation that you have open in your calculation dialog. It can highlight patterns that you search for in your script steps. Gives you a search box for the relationship graph. Lets you customize the fonts that you use into calcs and scripts. So there's a ton of things, and Christian is with us today. I'm sure there may be things that I'm forgetting about, but it is a great tool that is helpful. The first one here about the variable declarations being checked for is something that saved me quite a few times. So a text expanding utility, okay, here's a few of them: a text expander, or typinator. I would say if you are working on both Mac and PC, look for something that does work on the two platforms, because you're not going to want to translate your snippet for one software into another one. But they're really nice and handy. In my case, I use them for all my let statements, all my case statements. So I already have the indentation done for me. I just need to fill in the rest of what I put in there. And snippets folder. So I myself am using Clip Manager by my FM Butler, but you can use others. I've heard of FM Clips and Dropship FM. So those are the things I recommend. And one bonus is about MonoDraw, that is also Mac only, and it's like ASCII art, but for workflows. So it's kind of like Visio, where you can connect things together, and it does its work. And at the end, you have something that is visual, but that is character-based. And because it is character-based, you can take it and paste it into the relationship graph in a note, and you'll get something that looks like a workflow right there where you need it, not in a separate document somewhere that no one's going to look at. So I think this is great to use. Couple parting notes. So there are only two kinds of programming languages. Those people always bitch about, and those nobody uses. So if you think that the problem is coming from FileMaker, that your code would be much more readable if you were to write on a different platform, think again. It's not the platform is not what the issue is. If that's what you think, I guess the problem may be behind the keyboard. Also here, a nice parody. If you Google for how to write unmaintainable code, you're going to find this document. It is somewhat lengthy, but it is really a great read. I had lots of fun reading it, but it's also inspiring, meaning you can take what's in there and flip it around, and it's going to be a great guide about what you can implement to improve your code readability and maintenance. And that is it. I think all I have left to say is now let's go and write code that others will trust.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. That's full of really interesting stuff. But we will have a quick discussion now, but I know Dimitris is waiting as well to do his discussion. So I suggest we have 5 minutes now and then carry any more discussion over onto the virtual bar afterwards. Is that okay with you? So anyone got a question or two they want to bang out as a Robert, or a bit of discussion topic?
I'll jump in with one quick comment. One of the thoughts we had on naming conventions is FileMaker as a platform is a little different from other platforms in that we have zones, some of which are modal. That's the way we think about it. So you're, for instance, working in the field definitions, and later on you're working in the layout, design space, or the script space. So one of the practices that we've done that's helped us is when we're in field definitions, naming a field, we'll embed metadata. In other words, information about name first, last. I put a little tweet up there because we did a little fun FileMaker fact on it. So field name, like name full underscore SCT, stored calculated text. So why do we do that? When we go to the layout mode or the script mode, that kind of information can be useful. We put a field on a layout. Can we open it up to browsing? Is it safe? If we know it's a calculation, we know it's safe. In a script, we wouldn't try and set it. In a relationship, we'd want to know if it's stored or not. So we embed metadata into the names of our FileMaker objects, and it makes our life easier, especially in complicated systems. That's my 2 cents.
Very good. It can be helpful and indeed, and at times if you need to take decisions that require that information, having it available from the field name can be useful. I know that in the past, some people have said it's also added maintenance. So there's no magic solution anywhere. It's always you have to wage and see, okay, well, how much maintenance am I taking on, and what's the benefit I get on the other side. I'm sure what you're referring to here, Tony, is something that saved you a few times. Otherwise, you would not be doing it. And at the same time, if you are changing the field type or things like that, you must have made it into a habit to make sure to go and update that metadata as well.
One other riff on that, just kind of a 2.0, is that we have a utility called system structure, and we use the design functions to pull out the field names as well as the metadata. And then in that particular file, we use conditional formatting and scripting to locate any field names that aren't in alignment with the metadata as reflected by the design functions and or the SQL things.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually kind of check it. Plus we're pretty good at not, we're better at setting a calculated field of text than making it wrong later.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get it right, we usually keep it right. But anyway, interesting topic, and thanks.
I'll have one comment, but that's because it works. So I work on the review team for Marketplace and all the SBA solution and all the stuff you send to Claris. And I gotta say is when it's properly done, as Robert is basically mentioning, where you've got nice scripts and everything is laid out, it makes my life a lot easier. And I work closely with the app review team from the App Store. And even though there's not that much commenting, but it basically makes a huge amount of difference the way we view an app when it's properly commenting and then when there's a structure in the background than when there's nothing. And we did find that. So we had a couple of cases in France where we had retiring FileMaker developers who had their solution bought by a new partner for big groups. And last year out of 3, we lost 2 because there was no logic in how fields were naming, how scripts were presented. We got 1 back because we sent it to a big partner of ours and we said, can you spend the amount of time to just make it look good in terms of readable for human? And we got the contract back. So even though most of your customers, I think, don't really care, when they view it, I think it makes you look better and it makes the whole system look a lot better. So both as a Claris developer and what I used to do before as a normal developer, I think it's really important to actually put that into every development. Because if it's readable and it looks nice, it might not do that much, but people are actually going to be using it and will actually like using it. That's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll stop talking.
Great.
I
Shall
agree.
we,
I wish I went through you'd done that slide about 20 years ago, Robert. Then it might have been useful for me.
Well,
some of the legacy
you know,
stuff I've got to do. So it is that thing. I think nowadays, I think we all now know, quite a lot of us do, quite a lot of us don't now know that writing code correctly and commenting it correctly is key. It allows so much easier flexibility to come back over. You look at a piece of code that you wrote 6 months ago, most of us wouldn't know what that was. And if it's not laid out right, you won't understand it. You won't be able to follow it. So
yeah, and there's nothing that I said today that is really really fancy. You know, it's all basic stuff, but it's about putting it up together. And now when you say like you have a huge code base now, and
Yep.
it's something that you should have known 20 years ago, I'd say of course I'm not suggesting that you go and you rewrite all of your code all the time, but it's never too late. You know, you can still make sure that for whatever you start implementing today, that you follow some guidelines that will make sure that whoever has to read it back, let it be you or let it be someone else, it'll be easier on them.
I noticed Penny's left the call, so she had to leave, but I'm sure she would have had a comment the way I write code because we work together. So I'm sure there would have been a comment from her saying, yeah, I wish Gary had taken heed and taken notice of what Robert has just said.
my comment, Robert, it's hard to do at first to write readable code and to comment it properly and your intention's clear. But once you start doing it, it becomes quite an easy habit to stay with. I'm late to the table like Gary, but you know, I feel it's good. So I wholeheartedly endorse what you've been saying.
No, and I think for all of us, we feel like it's always, I should have been more into this earlier, you know. And what's behind us is behind us. We can only look forward. So let's make sure that for the new stuff we do, we do that. And for the old stuff, well, it could be an opportunity, you know, because we said for code that we cannot trust tends to be falling victim to being replaced. So maybe we should indeed replace it and see that it now stands as code that can be trusted.
Yeah. Excellent. Should we take I'm sure there's going to be more comments on that, more discussion on that afterwards. But should we move on to Dimitris now? Who I hope's still here somewhere.
He is. Yeah.
I guess there he is. So Dimitris, do you want to just launch into this? And thank you very much, Robert. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll carry on talking about it afterwards.
Sure. Well, hello everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces and read some familiar names from the people who are attending. It's actually my first time speaking to this group, but I think after the Engage 2020 Slack marathon that was run over those few days, somehow I landed inside the Slack space of this UK sort of group. And then I saw from in there that, you know, you guys had these sessions, and reading through the website, I saw that there was an ability to propose a certain topic for discussion. So we have spent a few months, obviously not full time, discussing within the team that we have based in Greece, how we're going to deal with the new sort of add-on functionality, but also the availability of JavaScript now and the sort of ability to tie it in much easier within the FileMaker platform. And we've had all these fantastic ideas about launching and going to Mars together with Elon Musk and coming back and all this stuff. But really, realistically, what we're thinking about is, you know, say you're a partner, you want to have a production line of these things, of, you know, whatever it is that you should be looking at initially, at least, to take advantage of the add-on functionality and the JavaScript stuff. And we've come to certain conclusions that we think are right, but I would really love to hear sort of a discussion from other people as well on how they see this sort of new technology and this new capability taking off. Is it something that we use just for UI components at the beginning? Is it something that we start building more complex modules with? Is it something we use to replace, certain code that you would be using in plugins, for example, and then you would be able to launch it in JavaScript? Would we be able to integrate with APIs rather than using the insert from URL using JavaScript within web viewers? So there's quite a lot of stuff that you can start thinking about. The question is, what would people start with initially? What frameworks would you use? Would you use a library? Would you go out there and find the best UI library that exists and translate all that stuff and bring it into FileMaker? What sort of stuff should we be looking at to make sure that someone who starts buying modules online doesn't end up with 50 tables of configuration options for, add-ons that they've purchased from the store? So it's that sort of general discussion, really, that I wanted to sort of launch and see what ideas people had.
I'm going to say that it's not an area that we've focused on yet. We're not up to speed with the latest technologies with that side of stuff. I know there's a few people here that I know will be using certainly the JavaScript sort of stuff that you're talking about. So from an add-on point of view, I'm sure Doug's got an opinion on this. So I'm going to pass the buck on this one because it's not my field, because we're not there. One thing I will say is I can certainly see the scope of what it is doing to the platform. It's giving you tools, it's giving you the ability to go in directions that we've never had before. And that's only a good thing. There's a lot of clever people that attend these sessions and other sessions that have been doing really clever stuff with WebDirect over the years. Now what this does is, instead of you doing clever stuff with external servers that are hosting this technology, you can bring it within the platform, and it gives you that scope to do it natively and locally. And I think from our point of view, for the breadth of technology that we use within FileMaker, I think it is an open door, certainly for our company, that we didn't have available to us before. But from a technical point of view of saying about which is the right approach, where you would go with the technologies I'm offering, I'm going to pass the buck to other people because I think they use it better than I do, because I've not actually used it currently. So if anyone wants to chip in, please do. So, and I see Jordan jumped in because I would have expected Jordan to jump in anyhow. So I knew you've just been waiting for this question. How you doing, mate? You're all right.
Mm-hmm. On my end, I would say I have not played with add-ons, but I can share a bit about what my understanding is. I feel like it's going to go into many different directions, and there are going to be great implementations. There are going to be some not so great implementations. There are going to be things that were never even expected or things like that. For now, I think there is the fact that it's not possible to update anything that gets deployed that influence how the shape of things, I would say. For that reason, I think right now it's more about small is beautiful. I would not myself try to make a very large add-on that brings a ton of different features. I think I would much more favor a very small add-on that is very narrow, focused on doing this one thing, but doing it right so that you never need to update it, and go from there. Now, I'm curious about how things will go, because we know that some elements have a great adoption into the platform. I would say mostly sometimes for custom functions and sometimes for some scripts. I can think of custom functions from Six Fried Rice Dictionary that's been going around. I mean, now people are using JSON, but I'm sure there are equivalents where if those are being used into add-ons left and right, well, they're going to be coming into the system more than one time, with a little bit a little extension each and every time. Same thing, I think, for some scripts that are coming from say Todd Geist. There's this HTTP request script that lets you send a curl request that is very nicely done. If we have 10 different people repurposing that into their own add-ons, then you're going to have all those different scripts where really only one could be. So I think it could yield systems where it looks like there's a bit of clutter behind the hood. But in terms of what it can make possible that is not possible, I think we're going to see some great stuff happen. But my really key thing to say is right now I feel like small is beautiful.
Hey, I'll jump in with some thoughts here. There's a lot going on with the FileMaker platform. There's a lot of possibilities. I took some notes here, and I think that there's a collection of technologies that interact synergistically. And I'll try and pick off a couple and tie into a project that we just did that I think was kind of exciting. Web viewers, JavaScript, and the FMP URL protocol. You put them all together and you can have what I like to call a round trip application. So we did one recently, which is a React, very popular JavaScript front-end technology, living quite successfully within a web viewer, interacting with the FileMaker and closing structure using the FMP URL protocol, which has been enhanced. And so that's one example. That's just one of the things going on, just one of the possibilities of a project for the FileMaker marketplace. To me, the most exciting underpinning technology, or one of the most, I should say, is the XML. FileMaker Incorporated, now known as Claris, has, I think it started in 7, they started to provide XML representation of FileMaker code objects, starting with scripts and script steps, good start, fields and tables and layout objects, and then more recently added custom functions, value lists, and custom menus. And I believe that that is part of the underpinning as to what goes into the add-ons, which I take to be a collection of code that's sort of injected into a system. Add-ons, it's a little bit new. I'll be honest, we haven't done anything with that yet. We're kind of waiting for the documentation to evolve so that we know kind of what we're walking into. But the web viewer round trip stuff, the other thing that I don't have a good handle on, maybe someone else will pick up on this, is some new JavaScript functions that showed up, I think, in 19. I think it's called Perform JavaScript or something like that. But the web viewer round trip apps, those are awesome, and those are available today. That's my thoughts on. There's a lot going on in the FileMaker platform, a lot of good things.
Agreed. I think that's the thing. That's the stuff that the clever people out there that are using every function of FileMaker and every facet of FileMaker. I think you're right, Tony. You can create that synergy between all the different tools, and that's quite cool. So I think the new stuff that's in 19 is just really eye-opening. What you can do, certainly with the tools that like Ian's been touching on with the machine learning and stuff like that. That stuff just wasn't available to us before, but now we've got so much scope with that. So.
Yeah. Something else also to consider is architecture, because oftentimes we have systems where you're going to have a file for the UI, a file for the data, a file for business logic, and today there's no way to deploy an add-on to more than one file. So it could be that you're going to need to make different bits of add-on and for them to work together. If you're aiming at systems that are segregated this way, or it could be that you may still be better off in some cases rolling out with a companion file that could be easier to update than rolling out an add-on. So there's no clear-cut definition of where to draw the line. But for sure, those are the things you have to look into before going too far into your project, because if you didn't plan carefully, it's going to bite you.
I think that's a good point that I would. It ties back to something that I was looking. I'm a huge fan of everything that FileMaker adds to the platform that helps people. I think we have different targets. We have the beginner developer who's thrilled to be able to add on a bunch of functionality into their system, and that's great, and they benefit from that. And then we also have a different demographic that might be building for the enterprise, where they're going to be more sensitive to the overall architecture, how many files, and how the code is distributed across files, for example. But in my mind, it's all good. Just different parts of the marketplace benefit from different pieces of technologies in different ways.
I think Robert made a very interesting point about the versioning. It's going to be hard to know when you produced an add-on how long that's going to last and how you're going to be able to update that. I think that's a particularly interesting issue.
Good, Dimitri, you were going to say, mate.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's I think kind of where we're focusing on. We're thinking we're going to land on that first and start from there, because I hear the thing about the round trip applications within, that Tony was talking about, and we have been using JavaScript within web views and the URL scheme quite a long time to do certain things. This has just, it kind of dawned on us that this is the first opportunity we've had to really focus on UI components that can be reused, rather than someone having to go in, for example, and create again and again the sort of classic pop-up with the search box, for example, and then the portal filtering below the values and all these things where, as Robert was saying, small UI components seems to be the perfect place to start right now, when we don't know much more about, the update functionality, for example. If that's missing, you can't really build real core components like saying, your accounts module or your customers module or your invoicing module and things like that. And plus, the other thing is not to go too far with it, because we've got some JavaScript guys who are literally sitting there going, right now we're going to get rid of FileMaker altogether. We're going to do everything in JavaScript in the web viewer and get rid of everything else, which makes no sense, because then you're not developing using FileMaker anymore. So from my perspective, and from the very, very initial discussion, I mean, starting small with small components, specifically UI-based components, could be a good start for this.
Mm-hmm. And also, I don't want to paint a picture that is too dark about updates, because technically there's still a lot of things that you can implement that will rely on interaction. There are still a lot of things where, for instance, you can roll out your add-on with data, and that data can after on be updated. So technically, you could, I guess, and I mean, I'm more brainstorming than anything here, but you could have an add-on that is simply an updater for a data table that you've rolled out in a V1 of your add-on. The person would execute that script to perform the update to the data, and once the data has been updated, they could remove that upgrade add-on with the matching scripting and everything, and leave behind the original add-on with the updated data. So we don't know where things are going to go with all of this, and I'm sure like Claris is going to keep putting more ways to do things that we need to do to make sure that it has longevity. It's just right now it's difficult to speak in terms of what are best practices. We're just starting, so we need to see what are practices before we can define best practices. And from the
it would be great to be at a point not so long, in the distant future, where we go and we say, oh, we wish we started it that way. After a year, 2 years, or 3 years, and we said, oh, we wish we had discussed that before. So I agree with the. I'm just thinking that having this open discussion about how people would go about setting these things up. I'm not sure what Claris is doing with all this. I'd love to hear Douglas's sort of view on it.
Doug's sitting on the sideline, not saying anything.
Yeah, he's taking mute off. You can see he's taking mute off and he's ready to pounce. So you know what? I'll just shut up and I'll let Doug go ahead. And Phil Jordan would like to, maybe give his ideas as well.
The only thing I was going to say is, so the one issue that we have, I would say, for the add-ons is if you basically use any of the add-ons and you don't actually play with any of the scripts, the layouts, the tables, doing an update is actually really easy because you're just basically updating an XML file and then you're just making changes. So that's quite straightforward. The issue that we have is as soon as people start messing up, and that's basically saying it nicely, whether the scripts, the layouts, or anything in the background, it goes into basically an area where we have to actually sort of be able to actually sort of read any changes that were actually made and be able to actually say, okay, for all the stuff that you've done, this is what we're going to put on top of it. So if developers make changes which are done properly, then we could potentially find a way to do those updates in a nice way. The issue is what we do find out is 99% of developers never save styles properly. They never save the styles into the theme properly. So when you look at the XML, you have a huge amount of basically of code in the background. And as Gary was saying before, is if you have a big file and you insert an add-ons, you make changes to it, and then you say do an update, it could take ages to run. And there's no way for us to actually know how much time it's going to do because we'll have to create something in the background to start looking around and trying to figure out how to clean it up. So engineers, and they're working quite closely with, I think there's Todd Geist and other guys, Jeremy Brown, I think. There's a couple of guys from Chris Hippolyte's team working on it as well, where we're trying to find a way of how we could actually get that to work properly. We know that pretty much the issue is not going to be within the JavaScript code, but it's going to be with everything around it, like how people manage their script when they basically start sort of applying a new theme to the add-ons that they have, and suddenly it just breaks everything. So we're just trying to figure out what is the best way to actually go about it. And the idea is to, with ETS, with feedback from the community, is to get to a point where we can say, actually, this is where we can actually go next step and see how it could be done. The other thing on top of it is what we're doing for the marketplace. So promoting add-ons, we vet them, I mean, I would say properly, but we actually go into the code and we just make sure that what they've done actually works. So there's always potentially a bug in the system, in the add-ons that was created, but we're trying to actually sort of make it pretty much stable so that it kind of works the way it was built. So
Can I ask the question, what's the pipeline looking at right now with these add-ons? Because we've seen some things being added by Fabienne. Is it Fabienne or Fabrice? Sorry.
Fabrice, yeah. One more thing, because he's been asking for that for 20 years, I think now. And
yeah.
He's done 4 in 4 weeks, and they're good. But they're really sort of basic stuff. But basically, what he's done. He's not looking to do massive stuff. So even though Seed Code did the calendar, which I think for them was really good, and it's actually a very good add-on, they control everything. So basically, they kind of says you add the add-on, you basically pick a couple of fields to get to work with the rest of the system, but you're not doing anything in terms of the layout. So you basically have the whole view, use what they've built for you, and that's pretty much it. Which is why we have this. It's not really an issue. It's just this difference between developers will actually understand how it works in the background, and new users will go, I'm just going to pick one of the 9. I'm not going to use anyone from anyone else, and I'll just have it the way it's built, and I'm not going to do anything to it. So for those, we can do update easily. Where we have the problem is this big amount of developers who will actually start playing with it and not maybe play with it properly. And this is where we have an issue, is how do we get those guys who actually might be working for someone else to develop another company, play around with the Kanban board, make it work exactly they think it should work, and then we do an update and it breaks everything. So we kind of have to balance out the two sides. So I think it's really good to actually start looking into it, maybe making small add-ons so that we know exactly where we can actually work within the update cycle, because the big one, they're going to be harder if people start messing too much with them. Like if you have seed code calendar and you mess it up, first of all, you're going to kill it. And then once there's an update, the system's not going to know what to update properly. So
the issue you've got there is that basically Claris is relying on Todd and Jeremy to provide all the documentation for how you do this, and it's provided no documentation themselves.
Yeah, so they've done one. So it's like the new way that we work at Claris is we're taking baby steps just to make sure that whenever we build something, we have enough feedback, and both our engineers can actually work with partners to actually get it to a point where we know it actually does work. So the add-ons were meant to launch with the release of 19 in May. We delayed that because there was quite a lot of bugs. We've got those 9s for the time being. We're trying to work on the documentation just to make sure that people on one end know how to create them, but the other end know how to modify them. And that's the one thing we've got to try to actually work properly. Because the one thing is modifying FileMaker, a lot of people think they might not be able to do it, but then if they have no knowledge of JavaScript, if they start playing with that and they break it, it just doesn't work anymore. So we have to actually get the balance between the two.
Yeah,
it does not be solved in the next month.
No.
It's a ongoing process.
Moving forward with the marketplace, that's also going to be one of the issues. Basically, is knowing which ones are good. I mean, for example, I know that if I get something from One More Thing, that Fabrice and Andres are, 99.99% are going to have done a great job on it, and I can rely on it. But knowing which ones in the marketplace will be good. If you don't know I guess we know the people who made them, and so kind of know who you can rely on and who you wouldn't want to rely on.
Yeah, so
I agree. I think from this forum, most people in this forum probably will know most of the people that have written that code. My concern is the masses of people that pick up FileMaker and they go, oh, I've got an add-in for a calendar, I'll just go use this one. And there could be 5 offerings and then which one's good or which one's bad. So I agree with what Ian's saying. Is there a review system on the marketplace coming for the code to then say, like the normal star rating system, it's got 50 reviews, all 5 stars, well, that should be okay to use then.
So what we've done currently is we haven't got a starring system for quality of the app. What we've done is the review team who get the add-ons test everything. And so if it's if it's between crap and average, we don't accept it. And then a lot of it is based on partners. So as Ian's saying is, we work with partners if we know the quality of what they can achieve in JavaScript and we play with what they've done. If it works with us and we know it's going to work for the rest of the team, we accept it. Currently, we haven't got that many people who've actually submitted add-ons. And the one who've actually submitted are actually good developers. And then we talked to them before they actually sort of send the stuff across. Because the problem is it's like everything else is, first of all, you have to build it, you have to taste it out, and then you have to make sure that it's going to work across multiple users. And like all of you, you've got other jobs to do. I mean, everyone's really busy, and so it's really hard. I mean, you have to spend a huge amount of time creating an add-on. It's not something you can do over the weekend and expect it to work properly. You have to write your scripts properly. They have to make sense. They go to the review team. If we don't understand basically what your scripts are basically doing or the way they work, we'll basically go, we'll just reject you. We'll do a call. We'll try to understand what you're trying to achieve. So it's not something that it gets accepted. I mean, it's like pretty much the App Store is if you do something that has no point and no meaning, we're not going to really accept it. So it has to be something that brings value both to us, the community in general. So which is why you're not seeing that many add-ons on the marketplace. I mean, I think we've accepted 6 or 7 max on top of ours. And then you have to find an add-on that someone's going to go, oh, this is really cool what you brought me, because I've been looking to do this for a long time. So people have been really happy about the calendar. We're just trying to figure out from the community whether there's other stuff that people have been asking for, and then just like, if I had this will be great.
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, everyone's equating add-ons with JavaScript, but
yeah, it does have to be. It does not have to be JavaScript.
So the one that I've built just for my internal use, just to try it out, is basically my logging system. So it basically logs script calls and just whatever, and essentially it's custom functions plus a plugin and a data table. So it's pretty simple, but there's no JavaScript involved. But it's actually still really cool how easy it makes that kind of distribution of something copying from one file to another.
I mean, the one I've created for me is the Naud 260 demo that we do. Is I've just put everything into an add-on, and then that way I can do a demo in 20 seconds if someone's asking for that. So you could use it for pretty much anything. The one thing it doesn't really do, which is a bit of a shame, which we're trying to get sorted, is to get the parts to be added to the add-ons, so that potentially if you had a layout, a basic layout that you want to basically use across all your layouts, you could basically just drag the add-on and it will create a brand new layout with all the parts pretty much set up and stuff like that. So this is some of the stuff that we work in the background, but we need to see how developers and from the ETS, how people are actually using it, to see how much we need to invest into explain documentation. If we need to spend too much time explaining how it has to work, does it mean that everyone's going to try to do them and actually fail? Or do we want to keep that to just good developers? So that's this question that we have internally to figure out how far we want to go with that. But I know the question that there's always been like the ideas of reusing a layout that you don't have to actually save on its own. So if all your development uses the same canvas size and the same objects on your layouts, whether you could have that working without any problems from an add-on, that would be something quite cool. So we're going to different directions just to see what the hell we can do with this, and so that it works for most of you, but you're good developers. It has to work for, I think, 95% of the community, which are not maybe as good and could really sort of make a muck of it if they play too much with it. I mean, we've had people basically who, of course, support where they killed the JavaScript for the Kanban board, and we're like, well, you have to remove it and start from scratch. And like, well, no, I understand what I did. Well, like, you basically deleted lines into JavaScript code. Either you can find exactly in the copy of it we can send to you, or you start from scratch. But there's not something we can do. We can explain to you, because if you're barely understanding FileMaker, there is no way in hell we can explain to you JavaScript and how it works. But this is the issue. And if you look at some countries, I would say that, I mean, the Italians really pick up JavaScript, but they've been doing it for a long time. The French market and JavaScript, they're like so far beyond. I mean, French developers, they don't want to learn anything in English nowadays. So we have a lot of difficulties getting French FileMaker developers to start playing with add-ons, because they're like, we don't want to basically do stuff in English. We want to do stuff in French. So it's the issue that we have on top of it as well.
That doesn't sound like the French, Doug.
But it is, because we have, I mean, this is one guy called, he does a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. He has some great ideas, and I like, build an add-on. It's like, no, because everything is in English and I don't speak a word of English and I don't want to learn. And I was like, well, it's actually not that hard then. And he's like, well, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But I mean, he's just being fucking French, but he's actually like, I don't want to learn a new language. I'm like, well, you don't have to learn it. You just have to figure out how it works. But you're like, no, I don't want to do it. So it's,
I think this may still be at this point, but
but it is going to be an issue in eventually, where, I mean, the stuff that we're working on, that where we talked to the last Engage, like Claris NG and some of the other stuff that we're doing, and even on Connect, where we're building this sort of connector kit for people to create their own connectors. It's going to get so that people have to learn more about JSON and more about sort of JavaScript and all this stuff, because there's a common language that people are going to basically start to actually have to be able to integrate, and the days of just doing everything in Excel and pretending it's working is going away. And it's going, I mean, for me, from seeing for some sort of larger clients, it seems to be going away quickly, because they want to have stuff that actually does work and that actually sort of has a meaning and saves time and makes people's job a lot easier. And the more we work from home, the more the system has to work properly. So doing pipeline in spreadsheets is not the way forward. Not that we do that at Claris, but
I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Hey, I'd like to push back a little bit, and Doug, not to you specifically, and I've said this privately in some private calls. We start our code with documentation. Anytime I do anything complicated, I sometimes sit down, bang out some simple stuff. Anything I try and do something that's complicated, like system structure or whatnot, I start with documentation. So I'll just say I don't get the idea of having documentation come late in the process rather than early in the process. I think it slows adoption. And I also think it's inefficient, because the people who are building the architecture of the pipeline, they're the people who understand. And if you've got 10,000 developers all over the world trying to figure out how the heck this works, you're going to get support calls. You're going to get people breaking it. You're going to get developers scratching their heads saying, hey, we're supposed to use this thing. We're supposed to use 19 add-ons, but I don't understand how it works. So how am I going to start? Is 10,000 people figuring it out individually? It doesn't make sense to me. I know this is being recorded. So I will say that I love the FileMaker platform. I think it's terrific. We all make mistakes. Documentation first, DDD, documentation-driven development.
It's where we're going to. So we've got this new blog from engineering I talked about before, where we're trying to get the engineers to kind of explain earlier than expected what we're doing in the background. It's a process that we started 6 months ago, so we've got to get everyone to go into that. If you know engineers, and you've all met Clay McHale, they're really good guys, but between what they have in their head and then explaining it exactly to everyone.
That's what interns are for. Get yourself some interns.
And so we're working on, we have some new guys basically where they're sort of plowing through the information and then creating sort of blogs so that people can actually figure out how everything works. And I can understand that the stuff with the add-ons it's with a third party. It's actually getting better than we were expected. And we were working on sort of to be able to actually do some better documentation so that people sort of really sort of want to play with it and make more headways.
Sorry, on that, we also raised that as part of the CPC, which is if you're gonna release a feature without documentation, you're basically putting something into beta, whether you call it preview or not, it's beta. And we raised that it doesn't seem quite appropriate to release a feature to more than 1 million users worldwide without having the documentation to support it in a production environment as well. So we did raise that to the US and say we understand the benefit of it, but if you're going to release it without the documentation to over 1 million users, it might be a better place to be released as a beta rather than call it preview, but put it in production copies of the platform, or over 1 million copies of the production platform as well.
On that, I'm going to get more wine. I'll be back in a sec.
We haven't got to the bar yet, and he's already got wine. What's going on?
I think
drove him to drink.
Yeah, Dimitri, on your one, the way that we've looked at it for the time being is just as internal catalog, really predominantly to reduce the amount of testing that we have and the testing overhead, because our testing overhead is astronomical in comparison to the amount of time we spent on dev. In fact, the writing the tests, running the tests, doing regression tests every single release is probably the biggest allocation of time we have. So we've looked at an add-ons as the way of almost to have what they are almost units of code in which we know when to go in. Basically, as soon as you put that add-on in, so for example, our selector, these are all the tests pre-built that we know pass because of that unit has gone into that file. So in essence, we've kind of looked at it from that perspective and said, if you're going to put a selector, don't rebuild a selector. Use the add-on, and as a result, here are the test scripts that need to be run, that need to be run in line with that, and that process just becomes more efficient. We've also had the same pushback in terms of there are the JavaScript frameworks, and there are a lot of low-code JavaScript platforms out there as well. And arguably, if you're going to use all the JavaScript libraries out there to achieve the majority of the functionality, it's hard push to go back against the JavaScript developers of them lobbying to not use FileMaker and use a low-code JavaScript platform instead. So we've just taken the I think, as you were saying before, some of the really nice small bits of UI, like signature capture on WebDirect is like 36 lines of JavaScript, or expanding in collapsible portal roles, or I think you mentioned I think Google Material have a really nice like advanced portal that we call it, that automatically puts the headers in, so you can filter, you can resort, you can drag and drop. Again, we just look at it from it either needs to improve UX, add an additional feature that we don't already have, or reduce testing overhead in essence. But we're just using it as internal catalogs for the time being.
No, I think I would agree with that perspective in the discussions that we've had, and trying to rein back the JavaScript the devs in that respect. The only thing I think that comes into mind here is this whole marketplace thing, and whether or not it starts becoming a viable a viable business option to literally say, right, let's develop, let's put 3 guys on this, 50 modules down, and let's start a production line of developing things that then can be purchased, like plugins that you would add to a sort of, I think Fabrice has mentioned WordPress, that he would like to see this in the sense of, you'd go into WordPress, you click, buy this now, add this plugin, add this thing, and then you can start working with it. I think we're very, very far away from that right now.
Well, I think I had a conversation with John at C Code about this, and I don't know, but you would assume that that's where FileMaker, or sorry, Claris is trying to head, even with the Claris Connect, the new version of Claris Connect, where people can build their own connectors. It would be a logical sense that you could then, if Geist Interactive have got a better connector into QuickBooks, that they would be able to sell their connector, and the same with add-ons. Speaking to John at C Code, apparently Salesforce have just gone through a similar process of building like an internal marketplace inside the tool. We're not Salesforce consultants, so I don't know. I'm just taking what John said, and he said it was an absolute shit show. Like it just didn't work the way that anybody thought it would work. Adoption wasn't what they thought it would be. Implementation wasn't what they thought they would have. And obviously, Salesforce are the world's biggest low-code platform, I suppose, if you want to coin it that way. And John was pretty adamant that it was just an absolute nightmare for them, for him, and for everybody else trying to sell their add-on through their marketplace from a Salesforce perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the FileMaker wanted to take it that way. Essentially, for Claris, it's clearly a good thing, because essentially but for the developers, it's not necessarily a good thing, because what's good for Claris is essentially commoditizing all this, which is really, really bad for all the developers who are selling them. And I mean, you see that in the App Store, that essentially nobody makes any money on that. Well, tiny proportion. But the other,
but
in the case of the Claris thing, because what you've got is a couple of chosen developers who are very involved in the development of it, who have a significant competitive advantage when it comes to developing any type of thing that they're going to sell in a marketplace like that.
I'm two-minded with that. Sorry, go on, Jordan. Go on.
No, I was saying, I can't remember who raised it. Apologies, because somebody definitely raised it. I think us Claris are also aware of almost you get to a point where it's counterproductive, where you could. We all know that you could probably get to 75% of what you want by a user going online, choosing a catalog of things they want and dragging it all in. But by the time the user gets to that point, the file is ballooned with that much just configuration in terms of these add-ons and just really complicated scripting that the user doesn't understand, that they're just going to hit the same ceiling that they hit now, but just a lot more complicated and a lot faster, if that makes sense. So currently they struggle with creating a simple script to save a PDF and send via email. So all that will go out the window with the add-ons, except now they will struggle, but they would struggle at further down the line. And actually, the reality is we'd have to tell them as consultants that we know you've spent 12 months and you think you're nearly there, but actually we're going to have to burn this house back down to the ground and start again. And I think Claris are aware that that's a far worse experience from a customer perspective than what it is necessarily now of the user understanding the limits, because I think it's just as dangerous.
I think it gets to that point. Sorry, guys. I think it gets to that point where I think the add-ons give that speed of flexibility for the novice to even the full advanced developer. They can look at it and go, right, okay, I know that piece of code then delivers what I need it to deliver. But I think the important thing we need to govern is the fact that if the add-on saves you time because it's established and it works, great. Don't forget that the fact that with a little bit of research, you could probably write the thing yourself with a little bit of code, and you understand that. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's about speed, and it's about adopting that delivering of a solution quickly and easily. What I don't want to do is I don't want to see the Claris Marketplace turn into the Google store for Chrome add-ons and extensions. It's the fact that's what you don't want. You want it to be a curated list of seasoned developers, structured code that, as Claris are certifying, that code is going to work. And that's what you've got to deliver. You've got to be able to deliver to the masses most of the time, whether they're novice to advanced users that can deploy this code. And I don't want to see 5,000 calendars out there. I'd like to go to seed code and go, oh, okay, I know how that works because I know they've been in that space for a long period of time. And I think that's what the marketplace and what these add-ons and these features do. I've been adding JavaScript stuff to web viewers for years, just hacking around bits of code, putting libraries in and so forth. I wish I had the technology we've got today, because I can go somewhere now and press a couple of buttons. Also, the code behind FileMaker as a platform supports it. It understands it. So I think that's what I wouldn't be scared about using these things, but be mindful about how you're going to maintain them and move them forward. I think that's the most important thing. You've got to be sure that you've got to be able to, it needs supporting. But I think if Claris is certifying it, they're almost already saying, we've worked with these seasoned developers, we're rubber stamping it for you. And I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think
Claris said that if you use this, if everything goes terribly wrong, I mean, Claris isn't going to indemnify anybody.
No, that's true. But,
I mean, no, Claris aren't underwriting the risk for it from on the ground perspective. I suppose they're underwriting the risk from a reputational damage perspective, just of the platform. But you're right. The Claris aren't underwriting just because, again, Doug's and his teams have signed it off. Doesn't mean that Claris are then taking responsibility for what happens when somebody drops it in a file. So there's still a layer of abstraction between I suppose a Claris endorsement versus them actually happy to say that we're underwriting the risk of you installing this inside your file.
Of course, US courts, who knows?
And but I think as well, I think what we, from the conversation that we've had with the CPC, what is abundantly clear is that there is a huge rate of customers that drop off the sales funnel because sponsors can't articulate or build a good enough business case to justify getting funding to engage with a consultant. I suppose, Ian, from your perspective, when you were saying about potentially commoditizing the consultancy world, there's a huge amount of customers there's a champion internally who has a sponsor, but they just can't. Sorry, there's a champion internally, but they can't get to the point of finding funding from a sponsor, and that's because they can't articulate what they understand to be possible. And the way that we see it is the add-ons should allow them to basically do prototypes and proof of concepts very quickly, to just be able to articulate that something is possible, and then what we're trying to trying to get Claris to do is try and almost understand that user as a persona, so you can almost stop them going too far. So you can say, right, look, these are all the add-ons. If Doug's on a call, you can be like, look, here's an add-on. If you want to calendar, drag it on, make it work. If you want this, drag it on, make it work. Right, now we've got a presentable file where you can go and get investment and funding, put an investment paper together. And at that point, once you're there, you need to then go and engage with X, Y, and Z once you've got that in place. So that's hopefully how we would like to see the add-on market from a sales and a lead generation perspective, is just allowing internal champions to get to that point where they can get some investment justified, and then they know that the next person to speak to is a consultant.
I think that's.
I think the add-ons are. I think the add-ons. Sorry, John. I think the add-ons is a bigger. It's a bigger cheese in the pie now. So it's much more easier for someone to create something, but it will reach the dead end from him quite sooner than before. But he will have that expectation, oh, okay, I can build something which is easy. He will get the funding like Jordan says. So it will bring more work for us in reality. It will bring more.
You're going to say, John?
Yeah, I think though, just one of the current kind of things have as an opportunity is somebody who locally, to me, because of where I am in the West Midlands, supplies to BMW. BMW, German company, and insist that all of your invoices are submitted to them in the German standard format called Zugford, which is the PDFA invoice with the XML of the data that's in the invoice embedded into the PDF. It's a well-known thing. It's all over. It's going to take.
We have a plugin for that.
It's taking hold even more. Okay. So the issue is, this is a bit of functionality that I think actually. So I have the ability to do all of this. I'm clever enough to do it. This is something I could potentially market out to other FileMaker developers, although the market for that is quite small. But if you came to the market and said, oh, you could do Zugford invoices in FileMaker, that's great. Oh, we could do it through an add-on, that's really cool. But the amount of work that would be involved to package it in a nice way into an add-on is non-trivial. And whether or not
it's impossible.
It's not impossible at all.
Well, you have to. Well, every company has different tables for their invoices, and you have to assemble the XML for it.
Yeah, Christian, that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's very difficult.
Okay.
Those are two very different things. I live in a world where most of my work is very, very difficult, but I make it not impossible. But that's an issue about going, well, but I can see where that would be an ideal kind of add-on for FileMaker, so that you could offer to your customers once post-Brexit, oh, we now supplying European companies that support Zugford invoices or something like that. That's a kind of bigger case than just a clever calendar. It's not just a UI widget. It's a whole level of functionality that you could bolt in. The only problem is the amount of bolting in you have to do, as Christian says, is so extreme that it's difficult to work out how you would standardize it, and the amount of work I might have to do as a developer, I'd be struggling to work out whether I could monetize that, and therefore whether it's worth doing. I'll do it for me, for this customer.
Yeah.
And if somebody else knows I've done it, they can come and ask me to also do the work for them. But the idea that I could sell it in a marketplace and make some money from it, really difficult to see how I could make that work.
So I just want to add one thing. Sorry, Doug. I'm happy for this to carry on because we virtually rolled into the virtual bar already. So Dimitris started it off as early. He started about half an hour, 40 minutes ago. I'll take Doug's answer to this, but then I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to run out of hard drive space for a start. And it doesn't stop this conversation. This conversation needs to carry on, but I'll take Doug's answer. I'll stop the recording. We just carry on. Okay, guys? So that's fine. Where you go, Doug? So.
Yeah, no, I was saying is, so I was going to be rude about it. So basically in Italy, they were one of the first European country where you had to get your quotes and invoices verified by a third party, and all of that is done through XML. And so we have one of our partners called Solymph, the guy you might know. They work sort of north of near Venice. They create basically part of the CRM solution, a tool that actually creates this XML file based on your quote that's gets sent to a third party, that gets validated, and then you can send back to the state. Pretty much basically it says that because the Italians being dodgy, unlike the Greeks, you can't actually basically modify the quote with new values after it's been sent. So when you create a quote, and I'm talking to the Greek, you can't change values after you create the quote. Same for the invoice. And so in Italy, it was one of the first country where they were pushing for that, and they're actually selling really well. But they're selling the whole solution. So part of the CRM gets these features inside it. I'm not sure they've actually put it out so that you can integrate it to your system, but within all the different SBA solutions that they have, they've integrated this solution. So it can be sold. They're just selling it across what they had before. But I can imagine that you could actually create it and sell it to anyone else. But as John is saying is you have to get the marketing around it to get people to buy it and then use it with whatever system they have. And that's where it gets really hard to be able to do.
Fair enough. As I say, I'm going to end this certainly the session to wrap it up. So only to the point that I can then create a time index so I can actually edit the video at the end of this, because those of you that haven't joined us before, trust me, you're in for a long night. This is the point where most people break for 5-10 minutes. They go get a drink, they go get something to eat, they do whatever. I think the record is 12:30 midnight, so it's about 2.5 hours on from now. But the conversation carries on going. I urge you lot to carry on staying and talk about any subject you like. Follow on with answering Dimitris' question if he's still willing to answer, or whether he's already got it answered, I don't know. We'll find out. But all I want to do is certainly wrap up and say thanks everyone for attending. Much appreciated. Certainly special thanks to our speakers that have contributed. So if you don't know, we do this every 2 months, and there'll be another one in, oh my God, it'll be January, it'll be 2021 the next time we do this. That's mad. So it'll be in January, we'll be doing this again. So, and I'm fully welcome all of you to share this around. And I know Tony's also put in the chat, which I will add to the video at the end of this, Tony. So I'll put your link to the US sort of stuff that you've done as well. There's various events that are going on in the US. People come from all over the world to ours. I think we should do the same as well. We should be following other stuff that's out in the marketplace to get content. So I do appreciate everyone turning up, and thanks everyone for attending. I don't know if you want to add anything, Joel. So if he can find his mute button, I don't know. No, he can't find his mute button.
I'll give it a go.
Yeah, there you go. You done it. Nice one.
I was just busy writing a message for the chat saying thank you to Gary, and sorry that I wasn't able to close properly because I've been having some technical issues here. I think Gary did a great job in closing then. Yeah, thanks to everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get involved as much as we can with this, and next one will be at the beginning of January. And yes, going to some other groups and getting some of that involvement too would be great. And particular thanks to everyone who's spoken today. It's helping contribute. And yes, fill your glasses, and we'll be here for a while.
On that note, I'm going to stop the recording.